evening, Commissioners and the public here. It's 6:30, December 14th. Call the UDC meeting to order. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Sawhill?
Here.
Ms. Sullivan?
Here.
Mr. Winchester?
Here.
Ms. Ream?
Here.
Mr. Condon?
Here.
Mr. Leonetti?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Ms. Morse has been excused. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item is minutes. Can I get approval of the minutes, please? Or a motion to approve. Thank you, Mr. Sawhill and Ms. Sullivan. Any comments? Anybody have any comments? Nope. Seeing none, okay, thank you. That those meeting minutes are approved. The next is disclosures. We'll just go down the list for disclosures. Mr. Winchester, you have any disclosures for tonight?
No, sir.
Ms. Sullivan?
No.
Mr. Sawhill?
No.
Ms. Ream?
Yes. For case 2016-0124 and 2016-0132, both cases on the consent agenda. I was not here for that meeting, so I will not be voting on the consent agenda.
Okay, so you're just abstaining?
Abstaining from voting on that, yeah.
Great, thank you. Mr. Miller?
Yes, I have one disclosure. In case 2016-0149, Turigan Boulevard upgrade, the petitioner's representative, Mark Kimmerer, and I are working on a project together right now, but it's unrelated to this one.
Okay, I don't know that you gained financially from this case that's before us tonight.
Nope.
So does anybody have any issues with that? Okay, nope. We don't need to do a motion. Okay, thank you. Mr. Condon?
No
Disclosures?
disclosures.
Okay, thank you. I have one disclosure, and that is for case number 2016-0121, the sign variance for St. Benedict's Church. I'm a parishioner at St. Benedict's, and I did not work on the project. I didn't even know about the project until last month when I saw it on our agenda. So I thought I'd just mention that to everybody and see what your guys' thoughts are. Mr. Sawhill. Turn your speaker on, please.
Sorry. Think you can fairly evaluate the application tonight? Do you feel you can act in an unbiased manner?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think you have a conflict of interest. You have no monetary interest in the outcome of the case. And, we can do a formal motion if that would be appropriate.
Yep, I think that would be appropriate. Thank you, Mr. Sawhill, seconded by Mr. Winchester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we direct the chair to participate in case, where are we? 2016-0121.
Great, thank you. Mr. Winchester would like to speak to it? Second?
I'm going to support the motion. I think it's, you're perfectly set up to handle this case. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else have any comments? Seeing none, please vote. Okay, so I am directed to participate. Thank you. Next order of business is resolutions of approval for the consent agenda. Can I get a motion for approval of the consent agenda? Thank you, Mr. Winchester. We get a second? Ms. Sullivan, thank you. Mr. Winchester, you speak your motion?
Mr. Chair, yes, move. Excuse me. Got my page turned up. Move for passage of resolution related to case 2016-0124 and resolution for case 2006-0132.
Great, thank you. Would you like to, anybody, Ms. Sullivan, speak your second?
No comments. I think last meeting we comment a lot.
Okay, anybody have any wish to pull anything? Seeing none, the consent agenda is approved. Thank you. The next order of business is regular agenda number 3, case 2016-0149. And what I'm going to do right now is read the appeal process at the beginning so that if anybody has any concerns, they can certainly voice them. It is not a public hearing. It's a non-public hearing. So an individual may have appeal rights relating to any action the Urban Design Commission takes, except commission recommendations to the Assembly which are not appealable. Appeals must be filed with the clerk's office within 20 days after approval of the Urban Design Commission of the resolutions, which is the commission's final decision. A fee for the appeal is required at the time of filing. Okay, so case number 2016-0149, context-sensitive solutions, transportation project plans in hand, site plan review for Turnagain Boulevard upgrades for Spenard Road to McCray Road. We have staff report, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair. The project will upgrade Turnagain Boulevard to current MOA collector standards, including new roadway surface, pedestrian facilities, street lighting, new landscaping where available, where the space is available, and improved drainage. The roads will be improved to provide safe routes for vehicular and pedestrian and bicycle traffic. A continuous roadway LED lighting system current with MOA standards is proposed. Pedestrian lights will be added along the separated trail as it meanders between, if it meanders within Kiwanis Fish Creek Park. In terms of the landscape design, the existing right-of-way can accommodate road and pedestrian improvements, but provides limited opportunity for new landscape improvements. On-street parking is provided adjacent to Kiwanis Fish Creek Park. I think it's changed from 19 cars down to 16 cars. The petitioner will address that. The design is in compliance with the 7 criteria for plans in hand design, which is on pages 2 and 3, 4 of the staff report. Under agency comments, the traffic department did have some review comments, and CRW has met with them to try and resolve some of these comments. And an email was sent out to the commissioners this morning addressing those comments and resolutions, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that as well. That's all I have.
Great, thank you. So I'll point out to the commission also, so we have 2 additional items that were handed to us tonight. One is the memorandum that came through an email, so we have a hard copy of that, and also there's another email from Ms. Ferguson dated today at 3:15 p.m. From Mr. Kimmer that I have not read. So, Ms. Ferguson, can you speak to this, or do you want to defer to the petitioner?
Briefly, it's some comments from the Turnagain Community Council, chiefly about the landscaping and the plant selection.
Okay. So let's just take a minute here and everybody read it, and then we can ask if there's any questions when the petitioner comes up.
Has the petitioner been given a copy of this too?
Well, the petitioner sent it to me.
Okay. They got it from the Turnagain Community Council. Okay, thank you.
Okay. I think everybody's close to being finished. So let's start with questions for Ms. Ferguson. Do we have any questions for her? Ms. Sullivan.
So Sharon, do you have any comments on this final email notes? Do you have anything to integrate into the staff report?
No, I'm leaving the plant selection up to the landscape architect, whatever he feels is appropriate for the project.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Winchester.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Sharon, the change they're requesting to white paper birches, that seems like something that you folks would normally discuss in terms of moose and other things, or?
Through the chair, Mr. Winchester, Mark and I did have a brief discussion about that. And, you know, my thoughts were we need to increase the plant palette in Alaska and doing, you know, the usual birch and, you know, the mountain ash is nothing new. I was very happy to see Mark wanting to do the Winter King hawthorn, which is, I think, a good idea because it just brings more plant diversity into the city, which is always a good idea. So, and it's a good test to see how well it's going to do, and then if it's a successful plant, I'm sure it'll get more use in town.
Thanks. I just would like that. Thank you for your comments. I wanted to know that that had discussion occurred.
Great. Thank you. I would agree with Ms. Ferguson on those points as well. So next is the petitioner. If you have your, come forward and state your name for the record and tell us about your case.
Good evening. My name is Mark Kimmer, K-I-M-E-R-E-R. I'm a landscape architect with Bettisworth North. With me tonight, I have Dwayne Manny, project administrator with PM&E for the project, and Justin Keene, project engineer with CRW, to help me out with questions you guys might have. Thanks for hearing our case tonight and for your service to the community. I think the staff report was concise, and I don't want to belabor anything other than going to the new points that you guys have received tonight. I will point out one very minor correction on page 1 of your staff report under the proposal. It says Turnagain Boulevard is the number 2 capital improvement program priority for the Turnagain Community Council. Sharon, that was what we submitted in the original petition, and Justin corrected me when we sent in that revised narrative to you, and it's now the number 1 priority. So real minor point, but wanted to bring it to your attention. Beyond that, let me speak to these changes and those emails. I think the most important thing here is the meeting that CRW had with the traffic department. In my mind, that changed things a little bit to the cross section, and I want to make sure you guys understand what that means from the letter that CRW submitted to you guys this evening. So previously, and in the drawings that you received, there was a cross section with 11-foot lanes, bike lanes on the shoulders with striped bike lanes with bike symbols and some signage associated with bike lanes. So after the meeting with traffic, here's what changed succinctly. The lane width was reduced to 10 feet. The bicycle lane striping and signage was removed from the project. However, there will be share of the roadway signs installed at the beginning and at the end of the project. The marked crosswalk at Wiley Post Avenue was removed. Some parallel parking, I think we knocked it down to 16 spaces now in the design, so a few were lost neck down on east side of Turnagain Boulevard required at the Bennett Avenue crossing. And let's see, we included an additional speed hump between Borland and Bennett. Those are the changes, and the CRW memo provides a little bit of insight into each of those points. And if you guys have questions for us, we can have Justin come up and kind of talk through some of those things as to why. The one that really jumped out to me was the bicycle lane striping going away, and I think there were good reasons for it. It was kind of inconsistent throughout the alignment, and I also took a few minutes to look at the bike plan and saw that Wisconsin is actually the street that's designated to receive bike lanes. So that's parallel to Turnagain to the west, and then actually goes it goes farther north without the kink that this has in the center of it. So that's the scoop on the cross section and the changes that came about since CRW met with the traffic department. As to the Turnagain Community Council comments, they originally had comments to the design team that they did not want to have moose protection fencing in the project because it was unsightly for a 1 to 2 year period, and they wanted to use chokecherry trees because they're less likely to be browsed by moose. So we kind of steered in that direction. And then in the meantime, after we submitted this package, we started receiving more comments from the municipality, Isabel Roy and Parks and Rec Department. Their comments were that they did not want to use chokecherry trees because there's been an issue of invasiveness, especially along creek corridors with that species of trees. Now there's one species, Prunus patus, that we didn't use. That's just a variety of chokecherry that's actually the big culprit and quite aggressive. That wasn't in this, but essentially we communicated with Turnagain Community Council. We came up with a substitute, which was European mountain ash. They agreed that we could use moose protection fencing because we needed to protect that investment that the city was putting in the ground. And then that email you received also, this was today that I received it late in the day also, they went a step further in the matter of a 24-hour period and had some other thoughts. Kathy Gleason actually had a meeting yesterday at 4 o'clock with the council, and this email is a result of that. And they got some feedback from the group, and that feedback was, in addition to European mountain ash, why don't you include some birch in there too to mix it up a little bit. Now, Sharon suggested or said that I had proposed the Winter King hawthorn, just some other species that we might use down there as a substitute to those chokecherries, which are a flowering tree, a little smaller, that kind of thing. I did suggest that. I got some information from Stephen Nickel here in town and got a few different species that we might try. None of those were really thought to be desired by the Turnagain Community Council. Personally, I'm okay with that. I'm fine with using the mountain ash and birch. The original trees I had in the plan were actually birch. That's just my preference. I like native plants. I like to use them. I think it's appropriate for the creek corridor. So I wanted to respect what Ms. Ferguson said about plant selection, then it was kind of up to me. I feel like it is a context-sensitive project, and I feel like I do need to listen to the community council, and they did do a group discussion about it, and this is what came out of it. So I'm okay with that. Trunk protection, they discuss putting mulch around the base. We actually have that in our plans that in front of you. I'm not sure it's very well called out, but because the plans are so small, there's actually edging and mulch around the base of each newly planted tree. So I feel like that's already been met. They mentioned grass strips. So these would be the areas behind the curb, between curb and sidewalk, that might just typically get lawn in them. We really don't have many of these any longer in the design. There were some on the west side, I believe, earlier, but as you can see from the plans, there aren't any little small pockets between back of sidewalk and curb, except more on the park side. And they suggest instead of grass in those areas to put shrubs. Now, the design criteria manual says you can't have any landscaping 7 feet from the back of curbs. So we'll take a closer look at this as the project finishes in design. I don't think there's really many or any opportunities to do this in the design. And usually what we're showing in there, we're matching up to existing seated areas or lawn areas. But just to let you guys know, I will look at that and make sure I'm not breaking any of the rules in the design criteria manual and see if there's any appropriate places to put shrubs in. And that the shrub they specified was gold flame spirea. And then they mentioned wayfinding signage. Now we did, the Parks Department, Parks Foundation has a wayfinding signage program. They've actually designed signs. They have a look for them. It's going to be a consistent look that they use throughout Anchorage. And all we're doing for this project is merely taking those template signs and putting the appropriate directions on them at some critical points in the trail. There aren't many of them. I think there's just 2 or 3 of them. All they say here is that they be included in that discussion and those decisions, which we will, of course, share with them and talk over with them. So I hope that answers, clears up some of the new information for you guys. I'd prefer just to open it up for questions at this point.
Okay, great. You have 20 seconds left.
Okay.
Not 20 minutes. Okay, great. Thank you. Ms. Sullivan, go ahead.
Hi. Within the long-term impacts anticipated with the project are the improvement of drainage. One of the major issues of that street is flooding. What was exactly the problem and how it's getting solved?
I'll have to have Justin come up and speak to that. He had a
If you could state your name for the record and spell it, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
Justin Keene, Justinkeene, with CRW Engineering Group. I'm the project engineer. And the main issue at Borland and Turnagain is there's an existing culvert that's supposed to drain that area out to Fish Creek that's plugged. It's in an existing easement, but the city, we actually looked at doing a repair a couple of years ago. They didn't want to get in there. It looks like there's maybe potentially some issues on property that we just didn't want to open up. So that's the main reason is just failing cross culvert that's just not allowing drainage to make its way out to Fish Creek. So the project, as you probably saw in the 65% design, we're putting in a brand new continuous storm drain system as well as a sub-drain system to catch, the groundwater, high groundwater in the area. That's going to a new outfall up at 36th Avenue. So it'll be, a great improvement for the area because every time we get those big rainfalls, recently street maintenance has, I think, stopped pumping that kind of lake that forms in the roadway, and they just close down the street and just let it drain out over time. So it's a couple days before they can open it up. So it's definitely a fix that needs to happen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Ms. Ream.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm assuming that S4 of S7 ends abruptly because there's 2 phases to this project? Because this says from Spinard to McRae, but I'm ending at 29 with a trail that goes on, and then I go immediately to details. So I wasn't sure. I was trying to go beyond Kiwanis Fish Creek Park to see what kind of wayfinding signage we might need.
Let's see. We may have a missing sheet here.
4. Well, S5 is just details. It doesn't
Correct.
There isn't a match line or an end project or anything on there.
Yeah, this does go all the way to McRae, and what takes place along there, which you can see in other, in the street sheets and stuff, is that we have on the east side the 8-foot wide pathway right along Fish Creek. From the planning and zoning, we had input to,
I was looking for wayfinding signage or some sort of
Gotcha.
signage, so.
you know, the wayfinding signs. Let's see if I can direct you there. They're mostly, if not solely, associated with the, if you look at L5, there's a wayfinding sign location legend there. And then in the plans, there's some little square boxes associated with that legend. So the wayfinding that's taking place is isolated to that little bike trail roundabout.
L4 to L5.
It's on L5. And on the lower right-hand part of the sheet, there's a little legend there, wayfinding sign locations and the content. So again, this is a case where we're taking the Parks Department's template signs that they've developed and putting this information on them. And we're, of course, we'll keep coordinating this with the Turning and Community Council so that the message is appropriate and most relevant. Also with the Parks Department, because it is located in the park.
Okay. Okay, that's good. I had a civil engineering, just a comment. This is plans in hand, I understand, on R12. Just keep in mind when you put in your catch basins that you provide room for the expansion joint. This is showing that and I understand these are
R12.
legends, R12.
Yeah.
I understand that these are probably not to scale, but they look to scale for a catch basin type 2 manhole.
Mm-hmm.
But I see that the catch basin manhole on the, oh God, where's my arrow? I guess that would be the west side, if this north is facing left. There's no arrow. Oh, there it is. I see it. Okay. Yeah, so the west side, it's shown that the inlet frame would be right up against a joint. So just make sure you move that over to allow.
Will do.
I'm sure you already have. That's all I had. That's all I had right now.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Ms. Sullivan?
I see that, well, I know that there's a lot of entries and also some buildings have parallel parking. Would the buildings are losing that parallel parking or entries?
You know, I don't think any parking's being lost. There are lots of driveways for apartments and stuff on the west side. I don't think any parking is actually being lost by the project, but I'm looking at Justin because he might have a little more info on that.
So there is some commercial properties on the south side of Turnagain, and there's some parking that's happening in the right-of-way along Turnagain Boulevard Arts Building. And that building in particular has parking available on their property, which is actually where they should be parking anyways. Everywhere else, we're just trying to give back what their existing parking is on private property, so not taking away any property. And then, of course, as we get towards the park, we're going to be putting 3 pockets of parallel parking along the park to help kind of promote people parking in the appropriate location. Right now they park kind of on the lawn area of the park, and there's actually a parking lot that's south of the park, but it's not really used that well. People kind of tend to park where they want to get into the park and either use the tennis courts or basketball courts. So that's kind of how we've set up the parallel parking.
Would one of that problems is because there's no definition between curbs, and do we have anything that would change that?
So there's no curb out there right now, so it's just a free-for-all. And so I think the Parks Department has actually had people that go into the park and actually drive and do Brodies in the park. And so not only adding the curb and gutter and the ped facility will help, but then as we line that side of the road with trees, that'll help, minimize. Yeah, and just define the road better, because it's, kind of a free-for-all right now.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else? I have a couple. So as it pertains to the landscape and the street design of the plant material and the comments from the community council, could you just walk us through your design intent that's shown on these drawings, on the gaps in the trees and the...
Sure. So most of the landscaping on this project really is associated with Fish Creek Park.
Yep.
And where this parallel parking is going. So we kicked around ideas for the design of this. What we ended up doing is having our parallel parking spaces, the curb, and then regular sidewalk, and then interior of the park, and then a planted area, and then within the park actually a separated 8-foot pathway. So the folks that are getting out of their cars wouldn't be dooring people on the bike pathway. They kind of have their own clear space there to unload their rigs and put whatever they need to on the sidewalk while they're getting ready to go into the park. Now, we do have some pathways that kind of connect from that sidewalk to the 8-foot pathway at key points in the park. So there's one associated with sort of an existing, well, it's actually a playground, so the southernmost walk that splits that planting, that separated pathway planted area. There's another that is basically a midway between that and the one that goes straight to the pavilion that we coordinated with Parks and Rec. And then there's a couple more through the broader areas. Now, where the path sort of meanders into the park a little more, that was actually the result of some input at public open houses, and the Parks and Recreation Department was open to that. In other words, they weren't worried about the pathway encroaching into the park and taking up green space. So that was coordinated. And what we didn't want to do was reduce visibility into the park. There's some shenanigans that go on there now, and they wanted to keep views into the park as clear as possible. And some of the comments from the Parks Department were, please don't use white spruce, so we wanted to use Fastigate spruce. It's more of a candle flame kind of spruce to kind of clean that up. I suggested lodgepole pine and just some other evergreens that wouldn't have a canopy that dropped all the way to the ground. But you will notice that the evergreens in there are by themselves, so there's no clumps. You know, that was the intent. We didn't want to create little clusters where people might kind of crawl under and sleep or something like that. We really wanted to keep it quite open for that same reason. So lots of grass, tree rings at the base of the trees with mulch to protect the trees from damage with weed whips, mowing, that kind of thing. So it's fairly spread out, and it's basically just supposed to create a nice treed edge along the park.
Okay, thank you. That's good. So was there much thought given to? Well, let's talk more about the size and the comments from the community council that talk about moose fencing. So now we're doing moose fencing, or the community council is asking to do moose fencing.
They're open to moose fence just because they realize that the choke cherries weren't going to work. We weren't coming up other than the hawthorn, which they didn't really like that much. It's kind of hard to find a tree that the moose aren't going to sample. Right. So they kind of came around 180 degrees and said, okay, moose protection, will live with it.
So is the intention of moose protection will be there for 2 years?
You know, I think our warranty period is 2 years on this one. So that is the intent. It's the intent that the contractor takes care of this. They maintain the landscape, they maintain the moose protection fencing, and once they leave, it goes away. And I think in new Title 21, there's well, I guess that doesn't really apply. That's more of a private entity requirement where you have to provide a surety for the landscape.
So I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on eliminating moose fencing and increasing the size, the caliper of the tree. Because my experience has been when you have a moose that's in the neighborhood, they really don't care what tree it is. If there's a moose rolling through there, it can be a mugo pine, it can be a Scotch pine, it can be a birch tree. So that kind of is a second question, like, is there a moose population that's in here?
I think there are moose here that came up, so there's definitely, it's a creek
Yeah, it's a creek
corridor. There's going to be moose, and
No
they're.
sign
and-
of moose browsing.
What's that?
I didn't see any sign of moose browsing, but, you know, I didn't walk through the whole thing.
I can't say I've actually seen a moose down there, or seen moose browse. This was information coming from the community council.
Right.
That there were moose in the area, which seems likely. We have increased the size of trees in other projects. The one that just jumps to mind was 9th Avenue, where we used 3-inch caliper Deborah maple, and that seemed to work. Those trees actually haven't done well because of a lack of water, and the tops have kind of died out of them, but in other places that seems to have done the trick.
There's very little moose browse.
There is, and I do agree that, moose will try just about anything once.
And they really like mountain ash. They like
Yeah.
the bark
Yeah,
of mountain ash.
yeah.
So I guess I'm interested in the community has certainly brought this to our attention. The design team has reviewed it, but it sounds like the intention that you have is to include moose fencing and change them to birch and mountain ash.
That's what we're thinking right now, yes. Now, it's kind of funny on the tree species. I personally consider it something that could probably change up to the very last minute of the project, depending on what kind of input you're getting. We're certainly, to answer your question, yes, those are the two species that are likely going to make this up. I intended to have more discussions with the Turnagain Community Council and try and maybe show them examples of some of these other species and see if they were interested, but that hasn't taken place yet. So at this time, this is kind of the information we have to move forward with.
Okay.
Now, I wouldn't be opposed to increasing the size or the caliper of the deciduous trees by any means. Sometimes they're hard to get that big.
With the intention of removing moose fencing. Increase caliber, remove moose fencing.
Yeah, that's a risk that I'm not sure I'm in the right position to
Yep.
take.
Okay.
It's not my money.
Right. Okay. Well, the concern that I have is that if we put up moose fence and it protects them for 2 years, and you put in mountain ash and you put in these cool species, if there's a habit of moose browsing in the area, it's not a long-term solution. It's a 2-year solution, and they move on, and then the moose come in, and you get moose browsing, and then you get derelict trees. So that's what I'm trying to evaluate, what the community likes, design intent is,
Sure.
and longevity of plant material.
I like the birch. I can say that much because that's what I had in there first. I think they'll do fine. The mountain ash, I wouldn't disagree with you. I feel like a lot of this has happened in the last couple of days, and I feel like there's still room for some conversation about that species specifically. My hope was to get something a little smaller, something that flowered like the hawthorn, the Winter King hawthorn, and just try it out. Get something flowering down there, which I thought was meeting the intent of what the community council wanted, which was something a little smaller, a little showier, resistant to moose. I think if you read on hawthorns, there's thorns on them. In this particular variety, the thorns are minor. So I don't know if they really understand that or not. These were sort of off the, okay, we looked this up on the internet. We think we know what this looks like. I don't really like it. Let's use something else. So I feel like it's still an ongoing conversation.
Okay.
If you were opposed to mountain ash, you could certainly state that, and
I
then
think it's
we would work from there.
Yeah, I'm on the same page with Sharon that I think it's the task of the designer to pick the species. I'm concerned about moose browsing, but the protection of them. I think that you guys are more than capable of picking trees that are that prevent, that are less. I think the more design intent that I'm hearing here is that the idea was that these are the trees that are kind of spaced as accent trees, not as like a defining edge?
Well, I think it might be a little of both. There were concerns about too much shade. So, you know, the sun's going to be setting in the west. It's going to be casting a bigger shadow. Let's put smaller trees so the park gets more sun. Those are some of the considerations. So I feel like a birch actually provides filtered sunlight. You know, it's not a super dense shade. So again, I think that's a good one. The mountain ash is going to provide a dense shade, but it's not quite as big of a tree.
Okay, cool. It is an interesting cross-section of roadway. You go from the south side all the way north, and it's not anything like what one would anticipate. But I think this is a good job. So we have a couple more questions. Thank you for the dialogue. Mr. Winchester.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to just briefly state I'm very supportive of moving to the birch and the mountain ash and away from the choke cherry. Lifelong Alaskan, that's a very invasive species, and I think we're doing that across. Everybody's pretty aware of that. Plus, so I think, and there are a few moose in that area. I actually have seen them, but I don't think that's a big issue for this. I think you're headed in the right direction. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Ms. Sullivan.
Just the first question. You have a typical section B1, Turnagain Boulevard E in sheet.
What was that? Sorry, what'd you say?
There's a typical section B1
Uh-huh.
in sheet C1 of C5.
See,
And there's a change from the sidewalk to the creek in grade that it seems like more than 3 feet, or maybe not.
did you say C5?
It's number 3.
What sheet?
C1 of C5.
C1, okay,
Yeah.
sorry, thank you.
So that's at the top.
Mm-hmm.
Seems that from the sidewalk to the creek, there's a big change in elevation. I don't know civil-wise. I mean, I'm an architect.
So you're wondering about the grade change
If
between
it's safe.
The cross slope, the 1.5%,
Yeah.
yes, that's acceptable.
No. The drop from the sidewalk to the creek elevation.
So maybe
Oh,
we go to the plan.
You know what? Actually, I completely see what you're saying. If you take that image and then go back to sheet L,
She's looking at number 3, actually, I think, right?
yeah.
Detail 3.
If you go to L11, there's actually fall protection railing on the top of that wall. So we didn't quite, have it all tied in yet.
That's okay.
What that would say is see landscape for fall protection railing or something to that effect. And it would point to the detail on L11. So that's a good comment.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Nope. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So, turn my mic back on. Case number 2016-0149 is now rest with the board, with the commission. What would we like to do? Can I give a motion, Ms. Ream? Thank you. Motion to approve. You get a second? Thank you, Mr. Condon. Ms. Ream, will you speak to your motion, please?
Yes, for case 2016, I move to approve case 2016-0149, context-sensitive solutions transportation project, plans in hand review, Turnagain Boulevard upgrade, Spenard Road to McCray Road, with the following conditions. Actually, department's recommendations number 1 and 2, and I'd like to add condition 3, which would be to eliminate the choke cherry and add white paper birch along with European mountain ash in the landscaping design. And I do have some findings of fact. Should I state those now? Okay, I'd like to state just a few findings of fact. First of all, just a little correction in the staff report. Turnagain Boulevard is the #1 capital improvement program priority for the Turnagain Community Council. Number 2, this project is in compliance with Title 21 and the codes therein. And this project also complies with the West Anchorage District Plan, specifically Transportation Objective number 4 and number 5. And it has the support of the Community Council.
Great, thank you. Mr. Condon, you speak to your second?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I intend to support the motion. I think that the Traffic Department, with their strong support of this, has reviewed the project carefully. I think it is a big improvement to that roadway, and the motion should be approved.
Great, thank you. Anybody have any discussion? Everybody's shaking their head, no discussion. So we have a motion to approve case number 2016-0149, context-sensitive solutions, transportation project plans in hand review, Turning Boulevard upgrades, Bernard Road to McRae, with staff conditions 1, as stated in the staff packet 1 and 2, with the addition of number 3, which states eliminate choke cherry trees and add birch and mountain ash. Everybody please vote. Oh, Mr. Kimmer has a question. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. I just want to make sure the motion number 3 doesn't mandate the use of
Sure.
mountain ash. In case the conversation continues and we're able to get some other species, I just want to maybe throw that in there.
So okay, just to clarify, the white paper birch is in fact in there, or are you wanting all
Paper
species
birch is
to
great, mountain ash is great, but I don't want to, I guess I want to avoid saying those have to be in there.
Okay.
Because we may have some conversations.
Okay. Okay, so then we'll restate condition number 3. Seems kind of out of the ordinary. But to eliminate the choke cherry and consider inclusion of the white paper birch and the European mountain ash.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to also add a couple of, go ahead. Is the second okay with that change? Mr. Condon, you okay with that change?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So there were a couple of things that were laid on the table tonight. I just mentioned that the Community Council, Ms. Ferguson has these on record, and then also the changes to and the responses to the Traffic Department's requests for questionings. Those are all clarified, and as far as I understand it, everybody is including that in this approval.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, go ahead.
the memo on the traffic, the issues that were being resolved with traffic, there's still a condition to resolve the traffic issues. So that memo tells us what direction they're going, but they still have their obligation to resolve that with traffic. So I think it's covered in the current
Okay.
motion.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, please vote. And that motion passes. Thank you for coming in tonight. And it's approved. Maybe we need a 5-minute recess. Well, it Okay, if we could all go back to our seats, that'd be great. We get started again. The next case we have before us is 2016-0150, context-sensitive solution, transportation project plans in hand, Site plan review for Seward Highway milepost 105 to 107, Windy Corner, MOA ADOT project number, yeah, it's there.
Thanks,
Yes.
Mr.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yep,
Staff
thanks,
report.
Mr. Chair. So ADOT requests approval of the plans in hand submittal for the Seward Highway. That's milepost 105 to 107, known as Windy Corner. The Seward Highway between Anchorage and Girdwood is classified as a rural principal arterial as defined in the AASHTO. The project will shift the roadway out into Turnagain Arm, affecting coastal mud flats and redevelopment uplands to provide access to Chugach State Park from the parking areas. Some of the proposed improvements are widening the roadway, an inside shoulder, realigning the highway to meet the design criteria speed, southbound, northbound 4 lanes, total 4 lanes, 12-foot wide auxiliary lane and a 12-foot wide travel lane. They will realign the railroad as well. LED lighting is proposed for the pedestrian underpass. The project currently has no existing utility poles within the area. However, alternative power source option is to use solar and wind power, which the planning department supports. Landscape design. The overall goal of the landscape design is to provide landscaping like you see along Turnagain Arm in the form of boulders, interpretive displays, and some kind of plant materials along the north and south parking lots between the parking areas and the concrete pathways that lead to the interpretive signs and the Chugach State Park kind of trail. The displays, those interpretive displays, will be designed to conform with the Alaska State Park's existing program along that you see throughout Turnagain Arm. The pedestrian design for this, the north side scenic parking area pass will connect the parking areas to the main wildlife viewing area and scenic overlooks. The south, there will be a trail extension to the new parking area that connects with the existing Turnagain Arm Trail. On the south side, that parking area, they will ramp down to a viewing terrace. There'll be a pedestrian underpass to connect both the parking areas on both sides of the highway. The Windy Corner project has a high scenic value and is used by lots of residents and visitors to access the Chugach Park. There will be a potential for view impacts associated with the material sites for the proposed excavation of rock. The estimated construction cost for the project is $71 million. They're planning landscaping portion is going to be $2.5 million, with about $1.4 million in plant material is estimated. The effectiveness in the community design goals, there will be additional public input for the permitting process prior to beginning construction. That includes that conditional use permits required for the material extraction. So the project provides accommodation to pedestrians through a shoulder, increased right-of-way for future multi-use pathways, and emergency access to the arm. Traffic engineering had no additional comments for the project. Long-range planning commented that the plans in hand demonstrates close adherence to the core values and goals in the Turnagain Comprehensive Arm Plan, and they agree with the project engineers that the proposed design is consistent with all other applicable land use and transportation plans for this area. The department therefore recommends approval of the plans in hand review for milepost 105 to 107, subject to the conditions found on page 7 of the staff packet. That's 2 conditions there, and you have in front of you a supplemental packet that was submitted, and that is addressing those structural design issues that Development Services had found in the agency comments. So the petitioner and petitioner's representatives here is tonight, and they can go into those, but it basically is the rockery walls and the orientation kiosk handling that wind load. And I have any questions, I'll answer any questions if you have them.
Great, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for staff? Hearing and seeing none. Petitioner is here. If you could state your name for the record and spell it, please.
Good evening. My name is Aaron Christie. Last name is Christie, C-H-R-I-S-T-I-E. And I'm the project engineer with Dowell for this project. Also here with me is Mike Spackman, who's grabbing some boards and easels. He is the lead landscape architect also with Dowell. Representing the owner, the DOT, is Quinton Arndt, who is the project administrator for the DOT, and then leading the team's public involvement is Ann Brooks. I'll keep this real brief. The packet, the UDC packet, and the staff summary provide a nice overview. But again, just to quickly reiterate, the objective of this project is to improve safety along the corridor of the Seward Highway, and through controlling traffic movements entering and exiting the highway by allowing a 4-lane segment that will allow ingress and egress to these northbound and southbound parking areas. That'll also allow an area for slower moving traffic and for passing opportunities. One of the bigger issues along this corridor is a high differential in speeds between those that are trying to get from point A to point B and quickly, and then those who are sightseeing. That's certainly a couple-mile segment in there where there's more sightseeing than other locations given the beluga and opportunities for sheep viewing. And then in addition, they'll also be realigning the geometry to meet current standards. And then, of course, to accommodate these improvements, the railroad will be moving out further into Turnagain Arm. Specific to the UDC submittal, which would be the parking areas, northbound parking area would be accessible, both northbound and southbound, through a left turning movement for southbound traffic. So that's here, allowing southbound to turn here. And would contain approximately 7 oversized vehicle parking spots and 26 regular-sized vehicle parking spots. And that would just be the core area. There would also be this undeveloped gravel parking area, which would accommodate roughly 29 regular vehicles and 6 oversized vehicles. There would also be pedestrian pathways all through here, right along the north edge, and then within the pedestrian viewing areas. And then this parking area would be connected via a pedestrian tunnel underneath the realigned Seward Highway to the south area, southbound parking area. The viewing areas would contain kiosks, interpretive signage, viewing scopes, all the things that you saw in the packet. And would also connect to the Turnagain Arm Trail right here. And on the southbound parking area, this would be resemble a normal, fairly normal turnout along the Seward Highway with walkways ramping down to viewing terraces and interpretive displays, viewing scopes. And the connection between these two parking areas would be ADA accessible. As far as I think what everyone has in hand as you're flipping through it, the staff comments are one of the conditions was to address structural comments regarding the kiosk. And we've done that and beefed that up and as we've proceeded with the design on the kiosk, and then also addressing seismic conditions on the rockery wall. We've actually removed some, if not all, I believe all of the rockery walls, just some of the rockery walls where they were higher and there was that seismic concern, and replace those with concrete retaining walls. That's it, quickly.
Great, thank you. You have 5 minutes, 39 seconds left. Do we have any questions for the petitioner? Mr. Condon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 questions. I look at the landscape plan for the south parking lot, and I compare that to the north parking lot. The south parking lot seems like it's got a good blend of, trees and rocks. I look at the north parking lot, and there's one small area with some plants and just a bunch of rocks. Am I missing something? Is that the intention, that it's going to be basically a bunch of rocks for the north parking lot?
I think that is the intent, given, when you drive the corridor, it's certainly known as Windy Corner for a reason, and that there's concern about larger, taller trees taking hold and actually thriving there.
To clarify, there are no trees, there are shrubs.
There are no trees. There are a few shrubs or very little planting. Is there any opportunity to provide planting beds that would somehow mitigate the sort of hardscape landscape plan you've got in mind?
I think there is that opportunity, but then that results in some maintenance concerns also. I think we're already skeptical about the ability for trees to take hold, and then the maintenance concerns, and there's really no other reason for DNR or the DOT, and most likely it would be DNR to go down in that direction. So certainly concerned about how long-lived those trees would be.
But you're going to do some planting on that south parking lot, and those are going to have to be maintained to a certain extent, but you don't want to do that on the north parking lot.
Mike, maybe you can speak to some of the specifics, if we have it on one side, if there's reasons why we couldn't have it on the other.
If you could state your name for the record and spell it, please, sir.
Good evening. My name is Michael Spackman. It's S-P-A-C-K-M-A-N. I'm a landscape architect with Dowell Engineering. And with regard to the north parking lot, we've added quite a bit of landscape material to the north side since you all have reviewed it.
That we don't see in our set of plans here?
That's correct.
Ha.
And the same...
Okay. So we're not really looking at the project we're looking at something else, some previous iteration?
I believe what you have reviewed was the DSR, which...
So we have the plans in hand.
Okay, the plans in hand.
Yeah.
But we've done quite a bit of work in this last 3 or 4 weeks to try to get the setup to our next submittal, which is coming up here pretty quickly.
So you recognize that the north parking lot's a little sparse in terms
yes, sir,
of
we
plans?
did. We did. There are some dimensional constraints on the south side. We're somewhat restricted by the the railroad right-of-way and obviously the highway. And then we've got some slope issues there too. So it's going to be not just rock. I mean, we are going to have some seeding, so there will be some green in there besides just the boulders. But as Aaron said, in the context of driving from Anchorage to Girdwood and then on around, there's lots of rocks.
Yeah, there are a lot of trees too.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I think what we're going to have with our subsoil conditions won't be real conducive to trees.
Trees, I understand. But it seems that there could be some, smaller kinds of plantings that could happen.
Yeah, no.
That I would like to see happen.
Yeah, we have added quite a bit.
Okay, great. So my second question, the project starts at Indian, correct?
The project starts north on the Anchorage side of Indian, about 106, milepost 106.
It seems to, according to your sort of general plan, it goes from Indian to Rainbow, roughly.
And falls in between those two communities.
Between those two communities. And let's see, you're not proposing any kind of bicycle path, and I believe you said it's because it doesn't connect to anything.
On both ends, right, they would not connect into anything, but we are providing room so that as future improvements are made on either end of the corridor as part of future projects, whenever those may be, that there will be that room available to build that trail.
Well, it's my understanding that there's a fabulous bike trail that runs from Indian all the way down to Girdwood. And it runs along, the old Seward Highway, and it's just a fantastic bike ride. Is there a reason why you can't connect the end of your project with that fabulous bike route?
Yeah, that trail ends at right in the middle of Indian, right at the bridge as you go over Indian River.
Mm-hmm.
It's about 105. So it's roughly 1.8 miles or so away. And so if we were to extend that, there really is no room. Right where the Windy Corner project ends to the south, the bluff comes right down to the shoulder. So there really is no room to create for a trail.
There's no way to put a bicycle trail from your project to this fabulous bicycle trail that runs all the way down to Girdwood?
Not without a lot of money.
Huh.
And I know that the DOT actually has another project that actually extends and goes through Indian, and they looked at that and tried to come up with some additional funding. So as part of that project, they could possibly extend the trail. So they certainly recognize the value. That's certainly a long-term vision. We're doing our best to accommodate with that within our project.
Well, I would also like to re-quote Commissioner Bailey's comment at the Planning and Zoning meeting where she regrets the lack of long-term vision and lack of connectivity with existing bike paths. And I would like to echo that sentiment, that you have an opportunity to connect with a really remarkable bicycle trail, and it's only 1.8 miles. On a bicycle, that's probably, 10 minutes? I think that that should be a priority item for this project.
I want to emphasize, I do want to emphasize one item. And first of all, I think I love that bike trail, and I think it would be great if it extended all the way to Anchorage someday. But as far as the feasibility, it's over that 1.8 miles, that's a challenge. Right now, and I encourage you to look at Google Earth the next time you drive through there to see how close that existing mountain embankment comes to the existing highway. To create room for a bike path from the south end of our project to that corner where it rounds out to Indian would require shifting the entire roadway over or moving a lot of mountain. And the moment DOT has done geotech investigation along the mountainside, the moment you touch, right at that location, the moment you touch that mountain, you're chasing it a long ways up, long ways. And so no matter what project happens long term, they don't want to touch that mountain. They're going to be building out into Turnagain Arm.
So you're planning to realign the railroad, so that's doable within this project, but a bicycle trail for 1.8 miles is not doable?
We have to, in order to make room, yeah, it was required to go further out into Turnagain Arm. Any improvements along, future improvements, north or south of this corridor will require pushing out into Turnagain Arm also.
So let's discuss this in terms of how it could be applicable to the project. So if Mr. Condon, if you're interested in including some sort of pedestrian connectivity to the existing trail, that's a different comment or discussion than including a bike trail within the project parameters.
Yes, it's the bike trail connecting to the existing bike path that goes into Girdwood.
Okay. So that's the preference, and it sounds like it's, do you know how close the trail is to the road? I know it's a mile or so south, but I'm pretty sure Bird to Gird is a trail, and it goes past here somewhere, right? Or past Bird?
No, it does not go through this project corridor.
Bird.
It stops well south of it, where it terminates.
Okay. So there's no trail that's uphill that parallels the road that bypasses the project?
Correct.
Okay. So the closest trail is some mile or so to the south?
Yeah, it's at least a mile and a half.
Mile and a half or something like that. Okay. So you're
So who am I addressing my question to? To the chair or to the petitioner?
the petitioner. I think he's responded a couple different times, but if you have more questions, go ahead. I mean, just trying to facilitate this. And
No, I think that's, I think that you get my point, that there should be some consideration of the connectivity between your development and the bicycle path in Indian.
Yes, absolutely. And then to the extent that we can, we're looking to make room for that. And certainly the long-term goal is to eventually have that pathway through that corridor. It's not part of this project.
Okay, thank you.
okay, great. Mr. Miller.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions. One is in regards to a comment received from a resident regarding the material borrow areas. I was just wondering if you could speak to that some. Specifically, where the borrow material or where the borrow pits are located, and what's that going to look like at the end of the project?
Yeah, the final borrow pits will ultimately be up to the contractor. And as far as the ones determined, we're looking to potentially permit one nearby at Rainbow, which is I'm assuming is the likely or the source that's of concern here. But we're also looking at other sources and evaluating those just to see if other ones are feasible. And we've learned of a few through this public involvement process we weren't previously aware of that have yet to be developed and were only recently permitted while this project's been ongoing. So we're actually looking to continue to evaluate some other options.
Okay, so let's assume for a moment that the borrow pit that this is Donna Jefferson from India. The one she's referring to is near Rainbow, the one that you had mentioned.
Right.
So what does that one look like?
It is the intent to continue to go through the planning and public involvement process for that, and that occurs through two different venues or methods. One is the conditional use permit, which is required by the municipality of Anchorage for material extraction. And the intent is to begin that in 2017, in the January-February timeframe to start that process, which begins with answering some of the questions of, such as what does that look like, and presenting it to the communities of Turnagain and Girdwood. So that's one required approach is the conditional use permit. The second is a special use permit, which is required from DNR, and it's the best fit for a permit mechanism to extract material from Chugach State Park.
Okay, so it sounds like those borrow locations aren't nailed down yet, and it's still an ongoing process?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, it's certainly the project's goal to get that permitted to give the contractor the option. And right now, previously it looked like that was the only option. There may be some others that we've learned about recently, but we certainly want to give that contractor that option of extracting material from Rainbow.
Okay, and then through your public involvement process, have additional people besides Ms. Jefferson mentioned this, mentioned the borrow pits and the aesthetic effects it has along the corridor?
Yeah, that's certainly come up, and we presented that at our last public involvement meeting, and provided some ideas for how we could mitigate that visual impact, and we would present on that further during the conditional use permit application process.
Okay, and do you suppose like the one I'm thinking of is at Bird Ridge or Bird Creek? Is that what you're anticipating if this were to occur at Rainbow? Would it be kind of the same sort of deal? Something that large parking area? I guess I'm wondering, what sort of reclamation might occur?
Right, and those are all questions that haven't been fully developed and would have to be as a result of the conditional use permit and special use permit.
Okay, thanks. And then the second question I had mainly revolves around safety, and the purpose of this project is to alleviate some of those risks with people just pulling off to the side of the road. You're making a destination, if you will, for folks coming onto the Seward Highway or exiting off the Seward Highway. I guess I'm wondering, is there risk of traffic jams through that area because people are pulling off, or have you spoken with any of the tourist companies that park buses there, or will there be bus parking there?
Right, there will be oversized parking available on both proposed parking areas. And as far as ingress, egress out of those parking areas, that's a big part of the justification for having this 4-lane section. Those outside lanes are seen as auxiliary lanes to allow and facilitate safe ingress and egress into those parking areas.
Okay. All right, I think that's it. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Ms. Ream.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First thing I have to say is, whose idea was it to go right to left with a north arrow down? Because as a civil engineer, I am completely lost. Sorry, that That did not need a response.
There's good reason for it. We can explain. I can explain it at some point. I can do it now if you'd like. But
If you would like to explain it,
yeah, it just has to do with the overall nature of the highway going south to north in previous projects, and it just happened to, in this project, it doesn't look normal because of the geometry through here. But when you look at the entire length of the roadway,
It is
it's more
duly
sense.
noted, these plans are extremely difficult to read.
They are difficult to follow, and that's kind of, I do want to speak a little bit to Commissioner Condon's comment. I understand the desire for extending pedestrian, or I guess in this case, a multi-use pathway, but I understand the restrictions that you guys are faced with a vertical wall on the north side and a railroad on the south side, and moving a railroad is no easy task. So I think, with bicycle facilities, there's an 8-foot shoulder. It's not marked. It's a controlled, well, it's supposed to be a controlled access. So, but bicyclists are not prohibited. But there's a nice wide shoulder that can take people to the start at Brown Bear or the state park, and they can get on the green belt there. So I've done it. It's not that uncomfortable. But I would like you to extend the pathway if you'd like. The other direction, all the way to Potter's Marsh. So that's no, I'm just kidding. That being said, I'm having a hard time with the whole layout of the pedestrian sort of plaza, the parking lot, and ADA accessibility. I'm seeing a lot of stairs, and that's an impedance to wheelchair. So can you help direct me to appropriate pages where I can see that those with a wheelchair, for instance, who can't climb stairs can get the same view as those that can walk? Because I'm having a hard time deciphering that.
I will pass this one off to Mike.
If I may I walk over there and show
Yeah,
you?
come on. Yeah, I think just bring the mic with you. Maybe Mr. Christie can be the Vanna White, or
So
that's as far as it goes.
this is sheet L3, and if you look at the following sheet, I believe it's L4. Yeah, if you look at the little enlargement down there in the corner, you'll see that there are stairs going that way, and then there's a ramp. There isn't any handicap parking spaces in that lot, but right here we have handicap spaces, and so this is an accessible ramp that goes up and then takes people to the overlook. Yeah, right there, and that's the overlook kiosk. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that's the main attraction, where we have the little amphitheater steps and see, this has been updated. This is part of our ongoing work, so it's a little different from that.
And okay, and so I see where that trail, oh my gosh, which is upside down. Can you rotate that 100? Thank you. I'm very visual. Okay. Comes in and comes up to our main viewing area, and that's great. And I think there's also an access to the asphalt pathway to the north in this view. Exactly. So they can't get to it from this viewing area, but they would go back towards the east, and then they could make their way. Okay. A little more circuitous, but they can make their way to that asphalt pathway. Okay. It could, thank you. I was having a hard time figuring out who was going where and what.
Okay, so these are the ADA spaces here. So a person would come up the ramp, go across the plaza, and up this ramp to this plaza space here. And then they can go out to here, but all the steps are on this route and on this route. We don't have any steps between there and there.
And then to get onto that pathway, if they ever wanted to, they would just come back to their parking lot. And
Yeah, they can come down here, go across here, and then they can get over here if they wish.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had, actually.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Sullivan? Ms. Sullivan?
Yes, I'm here. So I'm going back to the bike.
Yeah,
I mean,
let's
I
talk
did
about
have a
bike.
lot of concern about the bike path, but
why?
I understand that you cannot extend the bike path. But why not integrating the bike path in your project? I mean, it seems like I bike often this road, and it's very dangerous to be in that shoulder. And it would be nice if I can jump at that point into your project and be safe for a while and then get out again. I mean, it's just one step in to having the full trail. Why is not integrated just in your project?
So going back to the original funding source, and I'm not sure how this was generated, my understanding is the original funding source wasn't necessarily meant to accommodate a trail through there, and the specifics of that I'm not fully aware. It originated before Dowell was involved with the project, but that's certainly something that's been discussed as part of the project. But that aside, just the practicality of adding this trail when it doesn't connect on either end, you would then be weaving into and out of traffic, into and out of the highway, and kind of changing the rider's expectations. So we don't necessarily want to, especially if people go down there and park there, that may be the case, and then they would then go to one spot or the other and would immediately push them out into the highway before they got to, I'm assuming they would be going south towards Girdwood. They would immediately end up out on the highway along an already dangerous section of road where there's limited room. So we don't want to encourage that, but what we have done is we have integrated it into the project to the extent that we're actually we are moving mountains to some extent. Right here within the right-of-way where we can is we're trying to we're excavating some additional room, which is at a cost, but it's within the right-of-way.
You step a little closer to the mic, please, Mr.
Yeah.
Christie. Or move it up. There you go. Thanks.
We're leaving, we're creating room so that at some point, once projects continue to the north, that there's actually room, that we've accommodated room for a trail so that we don't have to do rework in this area.
And
The idea is it's cost effective now to do some additional excavation, not just excavation, but blasting along that mountainside to leave room for a future trail.
And that's in that area. What about the rest? Are you trying, do we have like a master plan to accommodate the bike path?
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that there's a master plan, it's just that there would be a pathway along Seward Highway. I mean, I think that's the long-term vision. Exactly what that would look like, where it would go, isn't defined in any master plan at this point.
But you think it'll be room?
Along this section, we are creating room, and as improvements are made, whenever that may be, perhaps within our careers, who knows? But as that occurs, it would most likely be on the inside, and that room would have to be made. So, as room's being made for whatever additional facilities, whether it's railroad expansion, wider highways, whatever the future may hold, there would have to be additional room made for that trail on the inside. Because there really is very little room. Many places the highway doesn't even have
So
proper.
I just want to be clear, you're not making room for a bike trail for the full length of your project.
To the extent that we can, where we tie in, no, we are on this side. On this side, we're not, and because here, what we're trying to do is tie back into this tangent, and you just have a mountain slope that comes down, and so we're not right now. The project intentionally does not blast any rock right here. We don't want to blast any rock. That's
So
been made
why
very
wouldn't
clear.
you make room for the trail for the full length of your project now? Why wouldn't you?
Because right now we have to tie into the roadway, and there's no room to modify the geometry to do that without extending the project.
Well, I get you don't want to extend it the 1.8 miles to Indian. I get that. But through the length of your project, it would seem that we would want provisions for a trail.
And we have from roughly, basically to the north end, we have all the way down to about the beginning of this corner where it's right up against the existing mountain slope.
So can you point to a cross-section that shows that in your packet? Because it sounds like it is horizontally accounted for, but it's not paved.
It's not paved, and it's horizontally accounted for right along the north section. And then, of course, there is a trail that goes from here to here, right? So, I mean, that is there. And then it would be relative, it's accounted for horizontally through this section, through here. It's just not accounted for horizontally through here at this time.
So if you were to work in the future project, what would you do at that area? What's the possibilities in that left?
This area down
yeah.
here, and this is eventually, if that would ever be accommodated, it would likely have to occur as part of a highway expansion project if there were to be a separated pathway. At that point, it would probably require some additional fill similar to this, where everything would get pushed out further into Turnagain Arm, and everything would just have to be shifted out enough to allow room for a pathway on the inside.
Thank you.
So could you just describe what the distance is between the toe of the slope of your cut to the toe of the railroad? Or can you point to a cross section that you're describing on that curve, this tangent? Is there a cross section in the packet?
I don't think we get into that much detail given the nature of the submittal.
You have one on B2, and it certainly shows not the mountain, but I think that would help the commissioners figure out if it's helpful to add it there, or you already have it in there and it's just paving. So you don't have that distance?
Not with me, no.
Okay. Okay. Ms. Sullivan?
That's the end of the job.
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Condon?
So, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So you're going to have material extraction areas where in Bird or somewhere as yet to be determined, and there is no opportunity to provide that material extraction as you continue south along the Seward Highway and enlarge that, widen that area to provide for a bike path that would link up to Indian and the old Seward bike path into Girdwood. So, could you incorporate, sort of kill two birds with one stone? You have an extraction, a material extraction requirement because you're going to move a whole railroad, and you've got this opportunity to extend a bicycle trail 1.8 miles. Is there any reason why you couldn't expand that area and use the material that is extracted for your fill for the railroad?
Right. We don't, at no point now or in the future, even if money was no limit, if money was no object, we would not want to touch the slope right here.
Can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, so the slope is so steep, the moment you start cutting into it, there's a preferred setback for structural stability, for slope stability. Mm-hmm. In the DOT, typically it's 0.5 to 1, 0.5 vertical to 1. And so it's 0.5 to 1 slope back there. It's steep, and as a result, but the current existing slope is even steeper. And the moment you start laying that back, you can't catch. You're halfway up the mountain until you catch. And the DOT has done investigations, visual investigations along the corridor. This area is known to be an area that is certainly not the most stable, known for rockfall, and so they just want to leave it alone. Or they're going to be chasing that slope up a long ways.
So another
And this is a visual observation?
I don't know the details about it. I don't remember the details. I clearly remember the discussions with them saying, whatever you do, don't touch the slopes.
So no geological kind of analysis, just sort of a visual.
I don't know how much, I don't know what evaluation went into that area, but at a minimum visual, and there may have been some additional borings. Historically, they've certainly looked at the entire corridor over the years, over decades, looking for material sources as the highways changed and expanded.
Okay.
So the result of that is that the road is actually pushed out into Turnagain Arm and moved the railroad, and the only thing that is missing is a trail. So the road is accounted for, the separation between the the eastbound and or northbound and southbound, and then there's separation from the railroad's pushed out. So the only thing missing is a trail.
Yeah, we were able to accommodate all of that. Someday, we were able to make room for a trail here. A lot of that didn't happen. There wasn't as much push out on this location because we're tying into existing.
So you didn't move the arc to be further away because of the tangent connection.
All right, we had to tie into the tangent relatively quickly without further increase in project costs.
Well, we understand the project costs. I mean, that's one thing. But there, Mr. Condon and Ms. Sullivan have valid points that you're moving the road out. Why is there not a trail associated with that? And it sounds like financially is the reason.
That's certainly a huge part of it, yeah.
A huge part of it, but technically there's really no reason not to move the road out further.
If we wanted to, I don't know how far it would have to go, but this would be an entirely different project if we were to further move the road out. In terms of where it would tie in. So
I understand the tie-in part, but the change arcs and that sort of thing, you're moving dirt.
Yeah. Right now, we're following the existing alignment. So this is a straight line that we're tying into, and we're continuing that straight line, and then increasing the radius so it comes out a little bit further right here. Chances are there might be a little bit of room right here where we're probably coming a little bit further away from the existing roadway. But once we get down to the end, the proposed improvements are largely right on top of the existing roadway, which couldn't accommodate a trail now. I mean, at some point we have to tie in, and right now they couldn't accommodate a trail.
Right. Okay. Mr. Condon, do you have anything else?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, with the DOT project, it seems that there's a scoping issue that, it seems the bike path should be part of the project scope. And every time issues like this come up, it's a budgetary issue. We don't have the money for that. But if you're going to have a project, you define the scope of the project. And bicycle connectivity is part of the Anchorage 2020 comprehensive plan. We want the citizens of Anchorage, of this area, want to have that kind of facility. That should be part of your planning process, should be part of your budget. And now you're claiming we can spend $71 million to move a railroad and move the road, but we don't have enough money to do 1.8 miles of bicycle trail?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Condon. Anybody else? Nope, I have a couple. On the pedestrian side of life, the pedestrian connection and the emergency connection, it's on sheet. But just curious what the emergency vehicles are using in there. There's a section in here. What emergency vehicles are going down there? Sheet P4. No, not P4. Here, P5. P6. P6. What emergency vehicles are going down there?
For emergency access, so the idea is that it's a popular recreational area right out there for windsurfers, and there's lots of water recreation, and so this is a great opportunity. There's very little opportunity for search and rescue to access that area, and so this is a great opportunity as we're relocating the railroad to provide a tunnel underneath the railroad to allow emergency response.
Right, what is the design vehicle?
It would just be the design vehicle. I think allows a pickup through there. It's about 8 foot height.
Okay, so you might consider reviewing this. They have a 7-foot clear, and I'm not sure what vehicle can fit down there. Maybe a 4-wheeler.
Yeah, no, we've been coordinating with AFD on what could go through there and what couldn't. I think they have it wouldn't be one of their emergency response vans. They have one of their pickup trucks can fit through there.
So that won't fit through there right now. It's 84 inches tall.
One of their trucks would. Yeah.
Okay. Must be a small S10.
I don't know. We've gone over it with them, and if not, yeah, they've got various things that certainly right now what they have to do, just for comparison's sake, is that when they have to access it, they have to crawl up over the tracks with whatever emergency craft.
Maybe they're walking. Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. On this, this is for Mr. Spackman. On the kiosk, interpretive kiosk shelter, could you speak to the material choice? You have wood with, I think it was shellac type 3 coating of some fashion. Could you describe your intent on that?
Well, that decision was made before I started with the project, so perhaps Mr. Schoenthal could elaborate.
The materials for the shelter are directly prepared by the folks at State Parks, DNR. And the intent is that it's compatible with other similar shelters elsewhere. I don't have familiarity with the use of a shellac. I think that would be pretty unusual. But the intent of it is that both the character and the material finishes would match up with other state park type facilities that are already existing down there.
Okay. Yeah, the concern was just wind-driven rain and this one application of treatment on the wood and then long-term maintenance. So pressure treated perhaps, or a different material selection could be long-term better and less maintenance perhaps.
Well, we looked at the shelters up and down the Seward, and DNR has a lot of time experience looking at how those wear, and
so that's similar then?
Yeah, it's very similar. I mean, it's identical.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. The MSC walls are on the south side that are between the right-of-way and the railroad. What percentage of the people that are on the railroad, how often do you think they're going to see that in their view shed? Is it close that it's just going to be a blur? Or are they going to actually see a wall and not be able to look up?
They'll be able to look up and over the wall if they're looking up towards the mountains. Having been through there myself, I think a lot of people look out to the water also. But sure, they'll be able to see the wall. And the wall, the highway sits above the tracks.
Okay, and in some fashion, the wall is 8 to 12 feet tall-ish. And so perhaps they'll be looking at it sometimes, and sometimes they'll be looking past it.
Right.
Okay? Might be a missed opportunity there for some sort of a treatment on the MSE wall. Okay, and then back to materials. I'm curious about the selection of stainless steel for the handrail mesh, stainless steel mesh. Is that something that's a DOT standard as well? That seems like a very expensive item.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure exactly
so
which rail section you're speaking of. You're speaking of the handrails for the stairs, or are you speaking of the handrails or the guardrail that's around the overlook?
Sheet L20 and L19, it's at the top of the stairs, and it's the handrail for the top of the stairs, and it's also the pedestrian rail. And what I understand, the pedestrian rail goes around quite a bit. That was the next question, like how much of there is it? Is it a small portion?
May I come look?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. But do you want to look at the cross section? Whoop, coming apart here. So it's circled. Familiar with that? Yeah.
Again, Mr. Chair, that was a decision that was made before I got into the project, but I believe it was picked, and Terry, Mr. Schoenthal can add to this, but it was picked as something that would be much more tolerant to the salty air than galvanized, just straight galvanized. And also it's a mesh.
Yep.
So it was an aesthetic thing, so it's not necessarily, it's more transparent than opaque.
Okay. It seems a little counterproductive to have stainless steel. I get the treatment with the water and everything. Galvanized is ugly, and I agree with that. But it seems like that there could be a different treatment for cost savings if we're talking about, cost.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
can
go
I
ahead.
jump in to
absolutely.
just add to that?
Sure.
They do call out galvanized posts, galvanized steel posts in that same sheet. I suspect that with the mesh, a galvanized coating is like a zinc coating, and because it's a mesh, it's going to be moving, flexing, and the galvanized coating could probably crack, which is probably why they're using the stainless steel that has the chromium, as a steel alloy.
Well, we have chain link fence on the project too. That was another comment, but
Yeah, but this is a guardrail, I believe, or
right. Yeah. Okay. It just brought, it kind of was like, oh, wow, stainless steel. Huh. That's nice. Okay. Did you guys consider a decorative fence at the underpass? At the top of the underpasses? There's a chain link fence there now. Was there a reason that you didn't do something decorative there?
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure. Excuse me. I'm not sure why. Other than that's the DOT standard for the top of those abutments. And again, perhaps Mr. Schoenthal can elaborate.
That's okay. That's good. Okay. Those are all of the questions that I have. Mr. Condon, you had another question? That was from before?
that was from before.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you. Anybody else? Seeing and hearing none. What is the wish of the commission? We're looking for a positive motion for approval of the case. If anybody is still awake. Mr. Condon, thank you. We get a second? Waiting for a second. Thank you, Mr. Winchester. Mr. Condon, speak to your motion, please. State your motion, rather.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I move to approve case 2016-0150, context-sensitive solutions transportation project, plans in hand review, Seward Highway, MP 105 to 107, Windy Corner. Move to approve with department recommendations 1 and 2, and I would like to add 2 more recommendations. Condition 3, provide additional plantings at the north parking lot. And condition 4, provide bicycle connection to the old Seward Highway bike trail into Girdwood.
Could you restate that last one? Sorry. Provide bicycle?
Provide bicycle connection to Old Seward Highway bike trail into Girdwood.
Okay, great, thank you. Mr. Let's see here. Mr. Condon, you can speak to your motion now.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I think this is a very much needed project in terms of safety. It's definitely a hazardous area for traffic, automobile traffic. I see it as an opportunity to take advantage of this construction process to achieve more than just increase the safety for automobile traffic. I see it as an opportunity to improve the bicycle connectivity for Anchorage.
Great, thank you. Mr. Winchester, speak your second.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will not be supporting the motion. With the 2 additional requirements, I would support it with only first one. The second one, I will not support.
Okay. Thank you. Does anybody have any comments? Mr. Sahil.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess first I'd like to speak generally for the project.
Okay.
You know, I would agree with staff's analysis that the project meets the goals of the comprehensive plan, and particularly the goals of the Turnagain comp plan. I think it meets the standards for the plans in hand review. I think overall this is a good project. It's going to add important safety features. It's a tough corner. I don't know what the volume of fill out there has got to be ginormous to accomplish this. 71 million for a couple miles of road is pretty crazy. So I think overall it's a good project. I think there's some space becoming available because we're pushing the project out to provide some amenities and turnout viewing areas for the sheep that are in the area, and I think those are good opportunities, and it's nice to see DOT take those opportunities with this project. And I guess I would suggest on the conditions of approval, if people don't like them, maybe they should make motions to amend them.
Yes,
I do support condition of approval number 3. I think additional plantings on the north in the north parking lot are a good thing. The petitioner's representative suggested they're looking at that, and we're willing to consider that. I would like to see the department take the opportunity to provide room for a bike lane for the full length of this project. I think that would be wise at this time. I do think there's opportunities to use the old road for a portion of the bike trails through that section. And I think it would be pretty tough to extend the bike trail another 1.8 miles to make the connection with this project. But I think long term that should be a goal, and there should be something in the pipeline to make that happen. I think Mr. Conant is right. That section of the bike trail from Indian to Girdwood's awesome, and we should be, as a community, working to extend that facility. But I do have some concerns with condition number 4. You know, we're kind of getting outside the limits of this project. But so those are my comments, and I'm looking forward to hearing additional commissioners' comments and debating some amendments.
Okay, thank you. Did you make an amendment just now, or
No,
were
I did
those
not.
just comments?
I did not make an amendment, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Winchester.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So thank you, Mr. Sawhill, for your eloquent response. I, too, support the project, so that part is evident by my second. I would, at this time, propose an amendment that...
Are you amending
yes,
a condition?
proposing an amendment. Can
Okay.
I do that?
So, yeah, make a motion to...
Yeah. Motion to propose.
So push the
amendment.
little...
Oh,
yeah, thank
sorry.
you. Thank you, Mr. Winchester. Okay, if you could state your motion now. Thank you.
Ready?
Go.
The proposed amendment is for a recommendation that DOT look at the possibilities in the future of extending the bike trail through this project and to connect to the 1.8 miles further down. Huh? Not making room, not changing this project, just look at the possibility and maintain that as a recommendation of this commission.
To condition, to connect to Girdwood?
Yes, but not a condition of approval. Deleting number 4 and making a recommendation.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion to amend to delete number 4, which is states provide bicycle connection to Old Seward Highway Trail into Girdwood, and add recommendation that DOT look at the possibilities in the future to extend the bike trail to the connection to connect to Girdwood. Mr. Miller, thank you for the second. And so now, Mr. Miller, if you could speak to your second.
I was going to speak to the
Yeah, you
first,
speak
if I
first.
could,
Go
the
ahead.
second.
First and second, right?
I think that we're just stepping way outside the bounds of what we can do other than to make recommendations. This is far outside the really major urban area of Anchorage. It connects to a small, distant area, and I certainly encourage that bike path. But I also know that this is a much-needed project, and to say they're going to have to connect the bike path 1.8 miles down to the existing path and all the way through this as part of this project, I do know what he's talking about the slopes there. It basically means they're going to have to move the railroad out for another probably 2 miles in order to accomplish this. So it's not a $71 million project, it's a $150 million project. And okay, we can hold out for that, or we can get this. And I think we can inch along here the best we can. It appears to me that they have accommodated the path on the north end, if you will, or of the project as best they could with the ability of this project to accomplish it. And I'm going to go with the discretion of these engineers have really looked at that road, I'm sure more than once over the last few years, and this is the best they can do for what is a reasonable project to accomplish this viewing area, which is very needed. And certainly the emergency response, I really applaud that. There is no way to get out to somebody who's in that inlet and needs emergency services, and right now this provides at least a way to get a pickup down there and a Zodiac through, down to the water fairly easily, and maybe make an emergency response. So that's my statement for the amendment.
Great, thank you. Mr. Miller, speak to your second.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is an important project, and I will be supporting it. I think Mr. Condon's right in regards to being able to connect the bike paths. However, I think Commissioner Winchester is also right that this might not be the project to do that, since it kind of falls outside of the project limits. So I'm worried that the revised condition doesn't really have anything substantial behind it. Just because we say, consider it or recommend connection doesn't mean that anything's going to happen. But I don't think that we're in a position right now to put a condition on this project to actually make that connection occur. So I will be supporting the project in general. I think the original condition number 4 is a little bit too prohibitive at this point.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Ms. Sullivan.
I agree, but I still think that could we add something that talks about making the necessary adjustments to receive a future bike path?
Okay, so we'd have to act on this motion to amend, and then re-motion to amend the condition if it would fail.
Okay.
So it sounds like you're in support of having some sort of trail connection, or some sort of trail component with the project, but not necessarily connecting.
I don't think they need to put the bike path, but I want planning and adjustments to make sure that the future bike path will, it's feasible to put it there.
Through the project site.
Yes.
Not connection to.
Yes.
Okay. Duly noted.
Make a motion, but I don't have a motion.
So we have to vote on this one, and so we have to figure out if anybody else. I have the same concerns as Ms. Sullivan, that I think it's imperative that we have a bike path that goes through it, not necessarily connecting to the Old Seward Highway or to Girdwood, but we have to be within our project limits. I think that's imperative to adhere to. So I will not support the motion to amend, and I will look forward to seeing somebody make a motion to amend the condition number 4. And Mr. Winchester has something to say.
Just a clarification.
Yeah.
It's my understanding, and we can ask the engineering group, that they have provided the ability to put a bike path on pretty much from the north end of all the way to and past the improvements for the viewing area, but that the south end or the right side, of whatever side you want to call it, south end of the project, they could not do that without realigning the railroad.
Correct.
And so I'm just suggesting to everyone, if you're going to say that you have to put a bike path through this project, you just put about $30-40 million onto the project.
Well, we don't know the cost. That was never
Well,
identified.
believe me, that steepness of that slope means they're going to have to move that whole section of railroad out, and then they have to realign the railroad for another half a mile or a mile to connect it up. This is not
that
a
wasn't
simple
stated
thing.
either. That
They
wasn't
would have
stated.
considered it, I think, if they could have. And so they're basically attempting, as he said, to connect to the existing railroad at the south end. If you move that railroad out 10 feet, now you've got to realign the railroad for another half a mile in order to bring it back to where you can actually connect it up. You don't just take the railroad and go, oh, here's 10 feet, zoom, do this. So my point is, it extended he said it made it very clear, it extended the project a good distance, could as much as half a mile or 3/4 of a mile, to realign that railroad back. I think we're really outstepping what we can do as a commission and the engineering capabilities of this group to start telling people just realign this entire thing and put a bike path in here that costs another $30 million. And I'm not exaggerating. I mean, he could step up and say what it is, but it's not $2 million or $3 million. It's millions to realign another mile of that railroad. So,
Mr. Christie, go ahead.
I really just don't think we
Go
should
ahead.
need
Let's
to debate
let's
this.
let's hear your response. And I am in particular interested in this realignment portion. That if you could direct us on your board, the portion that goes beyond the project that Mr. Winchester is alluding to, that would be necessary to realign if we add a 10-foot bike lane between the tangent curves of the south portion of the road.
Sure, so I have a number of things to address here. So,
Can you move the mic up?
The project, the goal of the project has always been to, just to reiterate real quickly, to improve the safety, right? A safety project. Now, I understand that we try to fit in other things to this as we go, and we've certainly done that with adding these viewing areas and parking areas. As we've realigned this, Anchorage being this direction, we've accommodated for room for a future trail from the north extents all the way through to the kind of right now where the existing turnout is. I see people trying to look here. And at that point, we have a trail, proposed trail, that goes, this would, someday this would likely tie into, continue through this parking area. And then you get to the old roadbed, so certainly any future trail would easily be accommodated within that old roadbed through here. And then as you come around this corner, we've made it a little bit of room. And it's someplace in this general location where we start coming back into the existing road alignment. And at some point we have to tie back in, and at those tie-in locations, I encourage everyone to drive through or jump into Google Earth when you get home if you're interested, and it'll jump out at you real clearly what I'm talking about here. But once you get down to this point, this area would have to get realigned. This radius would have to come out further, and it would have to tie into a tangent. It would have to tie into a tangent that's further out also, and where that tangent ties in, it's at least another half a mile. At one point, this project kept on looking. As soon as we get to the extents of it, we were like, oh, what if we could improve this, right? I mean, it's an old road. But really, we had to focus on the safety of this. And at one point, we thought about, just at the very early concept stage, of extending down to Falls Creek. and that's about another half a mile down. And if I recall, some of our initial estimates, coincidentally, were about another $30 million. We were in the $100 million range for project costs at the very initial concepts if we extended it down just to Falls Creek, which is just about another half a mile. Not
The
even.
entire project,
That's right.
not just the railroad realignment.
Well, that would have been part of it. It would have, yes. In order to tie in and continue the road improvements down to that point, you have to move the railroad out and do other things.
So it's not as simple as let's say that arc is 1,000-foot radius. It's not as simple as making it a tighter radius.
Right.
And provide, because a tighter radius would bring it away from the road, away from the embankment. It wouldn't adjust the parallel, but it would bring it away from the embankment.
If it was a larger radius, then it would actually bring it in closer.
Right, I was going the other direction.
Yeah.
Smaller radius.
Right. If it was smaller, then it brings us further out.
Right.
Right.
Keeping the tangents
Yep.
and having a smaller radius.
Right.
So that's the point that I was getting at. I agree with Mr. Winchester 110% that if you push it out, keep the same radius, and tie in tangent a half mile down, it's going to make a boat ton more effort.
And you know,
But
we've
that
done
was
that
not
to the
the intention.
extent that we can and created a little bit of room right in here. But again, we'd start tying into the tangent right around this location. So there's not much room to.
You mentioned that if you were to design this future bike path, you will do an underpass to cross to the other side, right? Or
Again, that depends on what the long-term plan is for whatever this pathway may go on either end, and that requires a vision of the entire corridor, which isn't part of the scope of this project.
So it sounds like, in summary, in order to include a bike path on the south portion of the road, of the project, an additional project needs to realign further south.
Right.
And it's not feasible to do anything other than not do it. But, I mean, that's basically what everybody's saying here.
Right.
And by doing that, though, that would realign this entire corner.
Right.
So we would be duplicating efforts.
Right. You'd end up redoing some of that work that you've already done, possibly.
Yeah. So the happy medium is, I think, what we're looking for here.
And so, you know, we did look just to tell you about some of the planning history to make sure the DOT gets the credit deserved here. Again, we looked at going down, making improvements all the way down to Falls Creek and pulling out the roadway, relocating the railroad further down another half a mile and creating room for the trail, just to allow that. It would have been nice, right? We went through a similar scenario. It would be nice to be able to connect this kind of destination area. It's already very popular to Falls Creek and allow that connectivity. But in order to feasibly do that, it really did increase the costs by another $30 million or so, with really, not a lot of improvements.
so with this project means that putting a bike path through there is almost impossible unless they redo everything that you've done.
Putting a bike path in would be possible once, if they expand the roadway and make similar improvements to what we've done through this corridor and extend that similar improvements to the south. Then just like we've made it possible through this section, it would be possible to continue south. They would have to make similar improvements to what we've done through this segment, and that's the case going north also.
Really, the difference is that it's a separated roadway. So they would have to do the divided roadway south. And once they do that, it pulls everything away from the embankment, and then there's room to have
But they will redo that curve.
they would have to redo that curve.
That's why it doesn't make
No,
sense.
we wouldn't have to redo the curve. We'd tie back in, and we've looked at that. We've looked at trying to minimize, knowing that someday the project, whenever that may be, maybe decades from now, but at some point we want to make sure that the minimum amount of rework has to occur, and we've looked at that. We've envisioned how much of that and tried to minimize where that tie-in location would be, how much would have to be reconstructed. We've been very conscientious both on the north and south end.
I mean, could we find a balance and say making necessary adjustments and planning to adapt to future bike paths so we don't build something that is going to have to be destroyed? I mean, there's a plan.
Say that again.
I mean, some kind of maybe words that are suggesting that they make the necessary adjustments and planning to adapt future bike path. So at least we know that it will work for sure, and we're not destroying anything
Yeah?
that it's been built.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Christie. And we are currently in the middle of a motion.
So that
Motion to amend. So we have to deal with this motion that's before us, and we've had dialogue on it, and we need to, it's gone. Where did it, it was ready to vote. So unless there's more dialogue, we need to vote on this motion to amend, which is basically delete condition number 4 and recommend that DOT look at the possibilities in the future to extend the bike trail to connect to Girdwood. So we need to vote on that right now, if that's... Did we get everybody? 3, 6, 3, 6. Okay. That failed? There's 4 green. Wait, where'd it go? So yay. 1, 2, 3, oop, gone. Okay, so it failed. I'm trusting that, okay, so there's 4 yays and 4 nays. 3 nays. So that fails. You need a majority, which majority is 5, right? Yes. So that motion fails. So we're back to the original motion, which is to add condition 3 and condition 4. So now would be a good time, Ms. Sullivan, if you have some ideas on a motion to amend. Thank you. Ms. Sullivan, please speak to your motion to amend.
I would like to make a motion to the original motion with adding the number 3 and then changing number 4 to making necessary adjustments and planning to adapt to future bike path.
Make necessary adjustments.
And planning to adapt to a future bike path.
Adapt to a future bike path. Period. No.
Without.
Can I help?
Yes, please do help. You're civil.
Provide space for a multi-use trail through the project to the extent practical. Provide a plan to the Urban Design Commission under the consent agenda for that trail.
You stole the words out of my mouth.
So I guess, Mr. Chairman, what I intend for that is for them to provide space, and I think they have. We just don't understand where that space is. And if we can get a plan that showed this is where the trail will be to the maximum extent we can make it through this, so we're not rebuilding anything or as little as possible. And we would just like to see that plan and understand that they've, to the extent practical, provided space for a multi-use pathway.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so number 3 is as is. So, Ms. Sullivan, this is your motion?
Yes.
Okay, so let me restate it then. So, number 3 is as stated, and number 4 is deleted.
And change 4.
Do we change or delete and add? Replace 4. Okay, replace 4 to say, provide space for a multi-use trail to the extent practical. Was there some mention of within project limits?
Yeah, provide space for a multi-use trail through the project to the extent practical.
Thank you. To the extent practical, period. Provide a plan to the Urban Design Commission showing the multi-use pathway for
Under
approval.
the consent agenda.
Okay, all right. Under the consent agenda. Okay. Thank you. So, Ms. Sullivan, we got a second with Mr. Winchester. Ms. Sullivan, speak to your motion.
No, I think we have
Okay.
spoken.
Thank you. Mr. Winchester, speak to the second.
I intend to support this amendment. Similar to what I had, it just basically is allowing us to see what they're telling us already verbally, and I'm perfectly happy with that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mr. Condon, did you have a comment?
Yes, I have a question about Commissioner Sawhill's verbiage. You're proposing that the trail be considered only within the context of the beginning and ending point of this project.
Right.
So it does not take into account any kind of extension to hook up with an existing trail that runs for miles all the way down to Girdwood. So it would not consider that 1.8 miles. That's off the table?
With that condition of approval, we could have another condition that asks them to look at what it would take to make a connection and add it to their planning process. But I see those as separate issues. I think it's a legitimate issue. I'd like to see the connection, but I don't know how we're going to do it with this project.
So we can make another motion.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, let's vote on the motion to amend, and it is the motion amend number 4 to say provide space for a multi-use trail through the project to the extent practical, provide a plan to the Urban Design Commission showing the multi-use pathway under the consent agenda. Everyone voted, and that motion passes. Okay, so now we have a motion on the table for approval with conditions 1 through and 2 as the staff has written, and 3 as Mr. Condon, which is provide additional plantings at the north parking lot, and 4 provide space for a multi-use trail through the project to the extent practical, provide a plan to the Urban Design Commission showing the multi-use pathway under the consent agenda. Did we have any other questions on that? I have one, if nobody has anything else, and it is pertains to provided additional plantings at the north parking lot. It would be helpful to have a standard in there of some fashion, in reference perhaps to Title 21. Mr. Winchester?
My understanding, though, was that the petitioner had stated they were adding additional landscaping, just didn't show on our drawings. And my understanding was that that was going to occur and of something similar now.
Okay. Was that your intent, Mr. Condon?
I don't think it's up to the Urban Design Commission to specify the kinds of plantings that are going to be used. That should be the purview of a registered landscape architect.
Well, the standard that they're held to is part of our purview. I mean, that's what Title 21 Land Use Plan points out, and so that is...
Yeah, the standard that I'm trying to impose is that they have some kind of planting that will improve the landscape. What that landscaping is specifically should be specified by a landscape architect.
Okay. So if that's your intention, okay. And it sounds like Mr. Winchester is chiming in. So if there's no other comments, let's vote on the main motion. Do I need to restate it? Mr. Condon abstained. Can you abstain if you make the motion? I don't know that. I don't think you can abstain. You can vote against it, but you can't abstain when you make the motion.
Why is this? Why do I have this option to press a button that says abstain?
That I can't speak to. You don't have to support your motion, but since you made the motion, you have to vote. You can't abstain from voting.
We'll register that as a no.
Yeah. So if you have concerns, we can certainly address it in other conditions. Or if we've already done that, then you have to vote yes or no when you what is an example from when you would abstain? If you weren't participating in a previous case, you would abstain. But when you go through the process and you make the motion and we speak to the motion and we have dialogue on the motion, you have to vote yes or no.
But it's not my motion. It's now been
It is your motion.
No, it's my motion had 4 conditions. That motion has now been changed from my motion to somebody else's.
Okay, so
somebody else's. That is not my motion.
It's a modification from the original.
It's a modification.
I would agree. Then you vote, go ahead and vote.
So then I can abstain,
No,
because it's not my motion?
yeah, you have to vote up or down. You can't abstain. We could take a recess.
Lori, is that correct?
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, you would need to either yea or nay your motion.
Okay. So how do I change this? Hold on. Okay. That should fix it.
I see abstain still. I'm frozen. I'm frozen in time. So did you vote no or yes?
I voted no.
Okay,
I
thank
had
you.
the option to vote no.
Okay, so that's noted, and the motion passes. Great, thank you. Let's see here. So that motion passes. Thank you guys for coming in. Thank you for all the dialogue, and we'll see you next time you have a project. Okay, whew. Let's see. Let's go on to the next one. Do we need? People want a break? 5-minute break? Use the restroom? Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. 8:52. Back at 8:57. Do we have everybody here back? Waiting for Mr. Condon. So as soon as Mr. Condon gets back, then we'll. Oh yeah, I'll start reading. Okay, so the next case, while Mr. Condon is out, I'll read the process here. The next case on the agenda is public hearings, case number 2016-0121, design variance from AMC 2111-050C3 to allow for a LED technology and a monumental backlit sign in an R1 single-family residential district. And I'll read the procedures here. The procedure by which the public may speak to the Urban Design Commission at its meetings is, after the staff presentation is completed on public hearing items, the chair will ask for public testimony on the issue. Number 2, persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in the Urban Design Commission Rules of Procedure. A, petitioners, including all his representatives, get 10 minutes. Rebuttal for the petitioner may be allowed when the time has been reserved. B, representatives of groups, community council, PTAs, etc. are 5 minutes, and individuals are 3 minutes. Number 3, when your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the commission. And number 4, an individual may have appeal rights relating to any action the Urban Design Commission takes, except commission recommendations to the Assembly which are not appealable. Appeals must be filed with the clerk's office within 20 days after approval by the Urban Design Commission of the resolution, which is the commission's final decision. A fee for the appeal is required at the time of filing. Thank you. All right, Mr. Condon's back. So, staff, can we have a presentation, please? Presentation.
Through the chair to the commission, this particular design variance is for a variance to AMC 211150, which is a signs in a residential district. The variance in this particular case is quite specific to the digital, the digital changeable digital copy that's on the sign. That if it did not have that changeable digital copy, it would not be subject to a design variance in this particular case. So the two aspects of the property that affect the fact that it would not be ordinarily allowed are the fact that the parcel itself is just slightly under the 9-acre limit that's required for a digital sign copy on a monument sign. And the second piece is that right now there's approximately 200 feet, I think, of frontage onto Jewel Lake Road, and that it's about 300 feet on Jewel Lake Road, and the requirement in code is that there's 500 feet. So the requirements for review of a variance of this type, there are 8 specific criteria that are addressed that you are asked to screen this particular variance in terms of approval. And one thing I would note is that the 8 variance criteria that are assigned are actually assigned to all cases where the UDC is looking at a variance. So whether this were a sign variance or whether this was a variance related to a bike path being located on both sides of a street, the criteria are actually the same. And the result is that some of these criteria really don't pertain well to the sign variance. And in those particular cases, I've identified them as not being applicable. And I believe there's about 3 of the criteria that are included in that fall into that category. The staff recommendation on this particular project is for approval. We have found that it either meets or substantially meets the standards for the variance criteria, and I will hit on a couple of the highlights of those. The criteria A, the proposed alternative achieves the intent of the subject design standard to the same or better degree than the subject standard. And the reason we find that the standard is met on this one is that there are currently 2 signs on the frontage, one for St. Benedict's Church and one for Lumen Christi High School. And that those 2 signs will go away and this one will replace it. This particular sign will replace it. The digital portion of that sign is only a small part of that. But historically, the site itself is non-conforming. It's approximately 300 feet on the Jewel Lake, and in the east-west dimension, it's 1,270 feet deep. So it's non-conforming because under current standards, you can only have a width-to-depth ratio of 1 to 3. So, for example, if this were more of a conforming site, the length along Jewel Lake would be significantly higher than the 300 feet that it is right now. So along those lines, then, Lumen Christi School is at the way westward end of the site. It's not readily visible if you're driving along Jewel Lake and seeing it, yet the site itself, or the high school itself, frequently serves activities and serves as a venue for ASD functions. And people are coming to and trying to find that particular location. And the way that they direct people to it in those instances are that they put out temporary signage along Jewel Lake. So that further contributes to the kind of signage clutter that happens along that location. And in the Title 21 doesn't specifically identify what the intent of having that 500 feet is along between signs with digital copy, but it seems relatively clear that you can infer that the idea is that it would reduce signage clutter and distractions that might be associated with changeable copy. In this particular case, the changeable copy helps to facilitate the ease of being able to change those notices for functions that are happening at the high school or at the church without having to manually go out and change copy. And the church had actually considered at one point using a simple changeable copy sign for that location, and that would be an acceptable alternative at this location. So in looking at that, at the first standard relative to the intent, it's our sense that the intent is met in that it consolidates signage to a much smaller, or to a single sign. It eliminates the need for temporary signage, thereby reducing clutter. And it results in signage that's actually probably more readable to a driving public that's going by at that location. The criteria B, the proposed alternative, achieves the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan. I've identified this as not fully applicable because the comprehensive plan doesn't specifically address signage in any location. It does recommend development of design standards to protect the quality of neighborhoods. And to that end, a reduction of signage clutter probably contributes in that direction. Item D, then, is the variance, if granted, will not adversely affect the use of adjacent property as permitted under this code, and in that case, the standards met. The item E, the variance, if granted, does not change the character of the zoning district where the property is located, is in keeping with the intent of the code, and does not permit a use not otherwise permitted. and it doesn't alter any uses on the site. It does consolidate signage, and to that extent, it improves the character. There are a number of signs for churches and other things in the very immediate location where this is located. Item or characteristic F then, persons with disabilities are provided with access as required. This standard is not applicable to a signage variance. And G, the variance if granted does not adversely affect the health, safety, and welfare of the people of the municipality. This standard is also met. And the final standard, standard H, is that in evaluating the request for the variance from the maximum sign height, the Urban Design Commission may consider topographic features and so forth. Well, there's no change requested here towards sign height. So to that end, that identifies the 8 criteria that are included for consideration in a sign variance. And staff comments at this point are in support of approval of that variance. And with that, I open it to any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Great, thank you. And just so people remember, when we go through this process, at the conclusion, when we make a motion, we have to state each one of these characters that Mr. Schoenthal just went through. So I think it's good to note as we're listening that that's a good reference from the staff packet. Okay, so Ms. Sullivan.
I agree. I think it's a better solution than having the 2 signs. One question. The new location for the sign, it's where there's a lot of existing trees. Will you be able to see the sign if there's so many trees, or are we going to take some trees down to be able to see the sign?
I've looked at the site myself, and the sign is closer to where the Lumen Christi sign is at the location now. But the specific to location of trees out there, I believe the petitioner is discussing actually adding landscape, and so they may be modifying existing trees in that location. So I would suggest that you might bring that to the petitioner's attention.
Thank you.
Anything else, Ms. Sullivan? No?
No, I'm done.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Condon.
Yes, Mr. Schoenthal, through the chair. This site is zoned R1 single family residential.
That's correct.
And this is a church?
Yes.
So this is a non-conforming?
No, it's totally conforming.
Oh, it is totally conforming. Okay, okay. And then the sign with this supplemental standard says that, so you mentioned that the width to the depth of the lot is sort of a deviation from the code, as well as the size of the sign. It's 32 square feet, whereas 20 square feet is what's allowable by code.
No, there's no variance associated with the size of the sign on this particular case.
So the variance is, go ahead.
It says 1 electronic changeable copy building sign per 300 lineal square foot of frontage is permitted up to a maximum of 20 square feet per sign.
This is not a building sign. This is a monument sign.
So, Mr. Condon, are you questioning the size?
Yes.
Okay, so it's
No, I'm
not before us
questioning-
for size. It's before us for the LED, whatever this thing.
For a digital copy.
Digital copy. Thank you.
There's no variance required for size of the monument sign.
Ha.
So the digital copy is not permitted normally in an R1 district of this size of lot, and this is a non-conforming size lot. So the variance is to add the digital copy to this parcel where it would normally not be permitted. The digital copy.
Okay.
Correct.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Ms. Ream.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just had one clarification for my own mind, that the division recommendation states the division finds that the proposal meets all 6 standards for a sign variance.
that would be an error on my part.
Okay. All right. I just thought I couldn't count. For
There
a second.
used to be only 6, I would note, so.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Great. Anybody else? Nope. Okay. Thank you. Now, is the petitioner here? Come forward and give us a presentation. If you could state your name for the record and spell it too, that'd be great.
You can hear me?
If you could just bend it down a little bit. There we go.
How about that?
Yep, that's perfect. Thank you.
My name is Jerry Ann Thorsness, G-E-R-I-A-N-N-E. Thorsness is Thorsness. And I am here as a volunteer with Lumen Christi High School. 2.5 years ago, we began to look at our current signage and thought we would like to upgrade it. And in a committee, one of the items that needed to be done was get the permit taken care of at the Muni. And I thought, okay, I want to do something really simple. I'll take care of that. 2.5 years later, here I am. We had to go through a lot of changes. But I think what you will see in our sign is that we have spent time looking at the code and meeting with folks at the planning department. Our sign is intended to improve our relationship with our community. It will allow us to combine the 2 existing signs. One was our current Lumen Christi sign was a Eagle Scout project in 2004. And very well done, wooden sign, but it's time for something more effective to be put in place. You had asked Ms. Sullivan about
The landscape.
the landscape. As we looked at our street frontage, we realized that we had an issue with a group of trees we had lining our front property. It went up into the electrical lines, and when we mentioned it to Chugach, they actually came out and took those trees down. We had included in our plan that we will be putting in a Petonia aster hedge, and then at the base of our sign, we'll have a 2-tiered flower bed with some perennials that we think will look really nice. So we're improving the whole look of that area. In addition, this sign will serve both the church and the school. And for reasons that were mentioned by Mr. Schoenfeld, we are a long lot, and so our school sits behind everything else. And we have a really nice facility. We are used often by outside entities like the Jiu-Jitsu Club, and we've had bazaars and the blood bank come and different things. And each time that those folks have had to come, they have no way of letting people know where they are. And so we have had a lot of signage clutter. And part of our choice to put in that reader board was to eliminate that clutter. I think Mr. Schoenfeld did a very nice job of explaining our position. We're very excited about making this change and improving the whole look of the front of our church and school. I don't want to belabor the subject and tell you things that you already have seen in paper, but I will tell you that I'm not alone. I have a small group of loyal fans in the back who are here all to support this effort. If you would like to hear from them, they'd be happy to come up. But if you would be satisfied with what I've been able to provide, they're happy just cheering from the back. Are there any questions about the project?
Yeah, okay, you have 6 minutes, 14 seconds for rebuttal, and now does anybody have questions? Ms. Sullivan, look at that.
More than a question, maybe it's a recommendation. I know you have the number in the base, and that's good because probably if I'm trying to find, well, if I was trying to find the Catholic Church and I'm coming from the opposite side, I would not find it.
Oh, okay.
Because I will get confused with the other name, which they're
Right.
one, but I would not know Yeah. Myself. So I'm just recommending that maybe you do something to indicate from the other side that
both of them
vote in the same side. But
Okay.
that's it.
That we can do that. That's easy.
Thank you. Mr. Condon.
Yes, through the chair. I'm just wondering, are there any other similar signs along the Jewel Lake?
Yes, there are.
Yeah? I
Further
mean,
south-
between, say, Strawberry and 88th?
Strawberry and 88th. There is a backlit chiropractor sign, and we do have some backlit manually changeable signs at 2 other churches. The challenge with that, and I did in my original application have some pictures, because they're manually changeable signs and they take labor, it's really interesting that those folks don't change their signs very often. And what you'll see, and I demonstrated in some photos I took, there's signs posted next to them for different events that occur at those locations. We'd like to avoid that. And we are a very busy campus because of the range of services we provide. And we have 800 families that attend the church, and we're hoping up to 120 students in the school in the near future. And with a great gym, which we do have, we can have up to 70,000 visitors a year. And we just feel like this will be a better way to serve our community.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Miller.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you speak a little bit to the operations of the sign?
Yeah.
I understand a digital sign, but I have trouble envisioning how this is going to look, whether it's going to be flashing or whether it's going to be going 24/7. Or so,
No.
could you just talk a little bit about that?
One of the nice things about this particular sign is that it is operated from computers that are accessed by a shortwave radio, and it is completely programmable. It has a sensor on it so that the light it generates will dim as the sun goes down. We can choose to turn the light off at any particular time and program it for a week or 2 weeks in advance. So it gives us a lot of flexibility. We did have one neighbor who asked us some questions about the sign, and in particular how it might affect his view from his home across the street. And when we explained that we had the capability of dimming the light and turning it off if it was a problem for any of our neighbors, he was satisfied with the answer and has been really supportive. So we're really aware of that and think we have provided a piece of equipment that can accommodate those kinds of needs. It actually generates less lumens than if we had a backlit sign with manually changeable text.
So do you anticipate operating the sign after your normal operating hours?
That's a good question. It will operate into the evening. We do have a lot of evening events. I would suspect that, would go off at about 11 p.m. at night, and our school starts at 7:45 in the morning, so it would go back on about 7 a.m. We have that flexibility to kind of figure out what's really working the best. Our messages would not be any shorter than 20 seconds on the display board, because that's the requirement of the Muni, and we're not looking to create some sort of a visual fireworks display. We just want to give information about what events are happening on the campus, or important information about events on the campus, I guess.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you. Anybody else have questions? Nope. Okay, so now open up for public hearing, and I don't really need to read anything, but certainly if somebody in the audience wants to come forward and speak, they have the opportunity to now. Certainly not a requirement, but not seeing anybody moving. So I'm getting the impression nobody wants to come up. So So the next process is to, right. Ms. Thorson, you have 6 minutes and 14 seconds for rebuttal. Don't know that you have anything, I mean, certainly it's your option to come. Okay. Okay, so we heard from Ms. Thorsness that she does not have any rebuttal. So now the public hearing is closed, and the case rests with the commission. What is the wish of the commission? Case number 2016-0121, sign variance for St. Benedict's Parish.
There's a motion.
Thank you.
And a second.
Ms. Sullivan and Mr. Winchester. Ms. Sullivan.
Yes,
Would you
I make
state
a
your
motion,
please?
I make a motion to approve case 2016-0121, sign variance for St. Benedict Church, subject to recommendations 1 to 2.
Great, thank you. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, I was concerned about the trees and the landscape. It seems that that's solved. I think it's gonna improve the property, and it's gonna be less visual issues. I mean, it's gonna be cleaner. So I totally support the new signage.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Winchester, speak to your second.
Yes, I'm full support of this. I think it's one of the best uses we've ever seen of a digital sign to be used to really do wayfinding and solve a community issue. And I just really applaud this. We've seen a lot of digital signs done that we had to really take a deep breath. And even in a commercial district, they get kind of over the top. But I think this is a great opportunity, and I hope you use it to the way that's intended, which is the wayfinding, and it doesn't become a fireworks. That would be the last thing we all want. So thank you, and I think it's great.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
I guess I would suggest Ms. Sullivan might
Yeah, I was going to do that next.
develop some findings for each one of the standards.
Yeah, so Ms. Sullivan, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, and H, please. If you could speak to each one of those and how it, in your opinion, meets the intent of the conditions. Page 2 of the staff packet.
Well, my findings. Read everything? Do we really need to read everything? Okay.
You don't need to read everything, but you need to state on the record how it meets that condition or character A, B, C. We did the same thing last month with Mr. Condon after the motion.
Okay, variance findings. The proposed alternative achieves the intent of the subject design standard to the same or better degree than the subject standard. The standard is met. The sign will limit sign clutter and driver distraction. Finding B, the proposed alternative achieves the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan to the same or better degree than the subject standard. This standard is not applicable. C, the proposed alternative results in benefits to the community that are equivalent to or better than the compliance with subject standard. This standard is met. Yeah, the digital sign will also provide a more easily readable means of conveying information. The standard is met. D, the variance is granted will not adversely affect the use of adjacent properties as permitted under this code. There's other similar signs in the area, and they are reducing the number of signs, so it would not affect. This standard is met. The variance is granted. The variance, if granted, does not change the character of zoning district where the property is located. It is in keeping with the intent of the code and does not permit a use not otherwise permitted in the district in which the property lies. The standard is met.
Persons with disabilities, is that what you're on?
E.
F, E, still on E, okay.
So the variance is keeping with the intent of the code, and it will reduce the clutter again. Finding F, persons with disabilities are provided with access as required by Americans with Disabilities Act and reasonable accommodation. This standard is not applicable to the signage. Finding G, the variance is granted the variance, if granted, does not advertise affect the health, safety, and welfare of the people of the municipality. This standard is met. Okay, signs in residential districts and development reserve district. Supplementary 21-11-050C, supplementary standards for all changeable copy signs. So there's an exception, C3 below. Electronic changeable copies permitted for freestanding and building signs on parcels that are 9 acres or greater within a minimum of 500 feet of frontage on a street of class 2 or greater than classification in the official streets and highways plan. Electronic changeable copy should not change more than one time per 20-second period. Electronic changeable copy freestanding signs are permitted up to maximum of 80% of the actual sign area. One electronic changeable copy building sign per 300 linear feet of frontage is permitted up to maximum of 20 square feet per sign. The St. Benedict parcel is 8.765 acres in area with 300 feet of frontage on Jewel Lake Road. Could I need to go through all this?
I think H is one that is left. In evaluating the request for a variance, it's on page 4 of the staff packet.
Oh, there you go. H, in evaluating the request for a variance from a maximum sign height, the Urban Design Commission may consider whether there are special topographic circumstances that will result in a material impairment of visibility of sign from the adjacent roadway, which significantly diminishes the owner's or user's ability to continue to communicate adequately and effectively with the public through the use of the sign. This standard is not applicable. And that's all the findings.
Great, thank you. Good job. So we have a motion for approval for case number 2016121, sign variance for St. Benedict's Parish Church, with motions as stated by Ms. Sullivan and conditions 1 and 2 in the staff packet. If we could please vote. And that motion passes. Thank you guys for coming out. Okay, so the next thing on the agenda is to go home. We did. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, you have something? Wait.
Through the chair, I have one comment. There is not a January meeting. There are no cases to be heard.
Okay, so no January meeting. Thank you. There is an event in January that Mr. Schoenthal brought up earlier, and that is that DOT has requested a meeting with P&Z and UDC to discuss how the context-sensitive solutions can move forward, and maybe 2 to 3 people from the commission would be good. I'm certainly interested. Do we have anybody else that's interested in attending? The meeting's on January 23rd. Do we know what time?
It's 24th.
24th.
I don't have a time.
Oh, that's right. You were going to.
It's the DOT standard quarterly meeting that they use for designers and internal issues, but they would like to dedicate some period of time on it to open a dialogue with both the UDC and the P&Z for the purpose of improving the relationship, I think, and moving projects forward.
And so the idea would be maybe to have one person from planning, one person from P&Z, and one person from UDC?
2 to 3 from each.
They suggested maybe 2 to 3 people from UDC and P&Z. So my recommendation is I would consider maybe a couple people, but it's up to you guys.
That's a lot of people.
Well, their quarterly design meetings are generally presentations.
Right.
So people get up and make a presentation on a subject, and people sit around, and it's like a learning, continuing ed kind of a thing. So,
and the intent, I believe, is that I will go along with you folks. We'll have a dialogue. We'll make a presentation on the process for context-sensitive design. And I think it opens the door then to have that discussion about incorporating various modes of transportation in DOT projects like bike trails, for taking a look at including amenities in projects where they're appropriate. And I think P&Z, as an example, raised the issue that they just get mountains of information with each one of these that is superfluous to being able to make decisions. And how can we streamline that so that they really get at the issues that are involved?
And that information is the DSR, correct? Design Study Report?
Well, it goes to planning and zoning twice. It goes as a concept design very early on, and then it comes back again as a DSR for approval. And then you guys follow that up with the plans in hand.
So is anybody interested in that besides me?
I am. I think I'm the one who might have suggested it a long time ago.
Perfect.
yeah, I'd be interested in going, but, again, they're going to be expecting a presentation.
And really, we can say it's all conjecture. I think it comes down to some sort of a document that's signed or by a head of some department that states, DOT, this is how you comply with the municipal code. When we go and give a presentation, we can tell them exactly what we need to have, but we're not going to have every project manager in the room.
But we do have such documents.
It will be most of the project managers at DOT will be.
It will be.
I agree with Mr. Condon's comment that the problem with DOT is their scope doesn't include,
and that's yeah,
every component in our area plans.
So the presentation needs to be geared toward.
Their projects aren't scoped appropriately. The other issue is their process doesn't align with our process. Their percentage of completion doesn't meet our process expectations. Even tonight, they have a landscape architect, but those were not 75% landscape plans. They developed their landscape plans at 95%. So their process doesn't align well with our process or our expectations. And that's something that either we got to adapt or they got to adapt, and I vote they adapt.
A cultural shift.
Yeah, it's totally a cultural issue.
And I think
But I think there's
like
things we could share with them that would help them. I think they need to do, the compliance matrix that are routinely done for municipal projects to show how projects comply with area plans and the comp plan. They need to start submitting those to us. And I think going through that process will force them to understand what should be included. It should be done as part of the DSR, where they're really defining the scope of the project. By the time it gets to us, it's too late. Everything's expensive. Can't add it. Kill the project. You know, I'm tired of hearing that.
Well, it needs to happen in the planning phase, well before the DSR,
Yeah, it's
well
gotta be in
before the
scope.
money is
It's got to be
even.
part of their environmental document. It's got to be right at the very
It's got to be
beginning.
before the money has been dog-eared or obligated. And that's the real issue, because they state there are federal dollars for non-motorized transportation, but they're not included in their request for funding. So by the time they get to their NEPA document, they're just looking at the funding that they requested for their safety improvements in the roadway. So it,
So
not saying
Terry,
you don't already know.
what's your approach? I didn't realize it was a presentation. What's your approach to this setting? What is your thought? Like you would do?
They haven't clearly delineated. I mean, they put it out there as a question and answer type of thing, to be honest, in the email that I received.
Okay.
So if in fact it is a presentation, I think we can approach it that way. But it's an opportunity to really open a dialogue with them on this that we don't get when they're standing in front of us in this setting. And they may or may not agree. They may or may not put it into practice ultimately. But we don't get anywhere unless we ask, fundamentally. So to me, I think we take advantage of that opportunity. And I totally agree with Commissioner Sawhill in that there's a real disconnect in sort of the project timing and expectations of submittals. And I mean, when you get a submittal, the notion that the petitioner stands up and says, "Oh no, that's already been completely redesigned," that doesn't aid in your evaluation of the project at that point. Although, I mean, I think it's a good sign that you note that this really should be expanded on, and that first thing out of their mouth is, we really expanded on that.
And I think that'll come with the cultural shift. So when they know what they're expected to put before us,
Right.
they'll make sure so they don't have to go through that argument every single time. They'll have a landscaping plan at 75%, at least to the design that they've got.
Yeah, but we've seen projects that have that, like the video fly-through thing. That,
You can't, oh.
Interchange.
The interchange. I mean, it was a skookum plan.
Yeah, it was. They had a great plan for the.
So I mean, maybe we
interchange.
approach it
Good
like,
job,
hey,
Terry.
yeah.
Do you see what you did for the interchange? $30,000 presentation right here.
Well, not the presentation.
I
but
know,
that drawing.
but-
No, the landscape plan was good for the interchange.
Yeah.
And on some projects, they provide landscaping, but very few.
But actually, that's a good point.
So I mean, maybe that's something we could start the dialogue with. Like, you guys do good work. I mean, this is one of them here that you've done, and this is one that was kind of lacking.
The other thing is they kind of have to come to us a little apologetically, because funding for these,
I
no,
don't-
wait, hold on. Funding for a lot of these, I'm not saying that it's apologetically for the DOT, it's apologetically for the poor project manager standing before us, because the funding that's been earmarked or obligated, whatever it is, was years ago, and didn't include the pedestrian facilities and I'm not saying that's okay to ignore that, but we're kind of having to play catch up on things that have already been funded, and so that's a limitation too. So really, it's here moving forward, and having a good understanding of what that funding source was, and are there opportunities for additional funding. Anyway.
We had two project managers here that didn't even know there was a staff packet and didn't even know there was conditions of approval.
She was the project engineer.
Yeah, and so they don't understand the process.
I'm defending.
I ran into Cindy Ferguson in the hall over at DOT after O'Malley was here, and she was not aware of the process, and she didn't like some of the conditions. I said, well, request a postponement.
Yeah.
Work with staff on conditions and come back. Oh, I can do that? And so they're not even aware of some of the basic processes to get through.
And they do have those above them that are aware.
Well,
and that's
over there
why
talks to each other.
exactly.
They're all little islands. They're all little islands, and they don't communicate. And so this is an opportunity to communicate with most of the project managers over there in one room.
Bringing in good examples of DOT projects that have sort of met at least
I've always wanted to make a list of DOT projects that actually have landscaping and did a good job, and just send it over to them. You know, do it like this, like C Street. You know, C Street has some great landscaping at you know, near Diamond and south of Diamond. It has some great walls.
Oh, yeah.
Those are noise walls.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That
Those
was like
noise
15
walls
years
are
ago.
well done, you know, and again, they don't like doing the glass panes because, you know, birds are flying into them. But, I mean, there's things we can do to fix that. You know, their walls are ugly, and if we could just get them to do better walls, I'd call that a huge victory. And
So I guess moving forward, the process is Terry's going to shoot an email to everybody, and then, or to me. Okay. So you'll see an email from me asking for volunteers, and I'll put a deadline on it in some fashion, and there'll be a date, and we'll go from there. Sound good? Oh, motion to adjourn. Oh, wait for a second. Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. See everybody
No
either in January or February.